Close your eyes and drift gently into the ancient forests of the Maya. The night air is thick with the quiet memory of rain, as though every drop has carried a secret across centuries. You are safe here, listening to a story told not in urgency, but in calm ripples of time. In this gentle space, we will follow the whispers of Chaac, the rain god once honored in offerings, dances, and sacred wells. His story is not told with thunder or fear, but with the rhythm of falling water, the kindness of clouds, and the endless patience of rivers. As you listen, allow yourself to sink into the slow current of history, where every belief is a soft stone resting in still water. This is not just a story of gods, but a place of rest, reflection, and sacred calm. Asterisk. Chapter 1. The rain in the night forest. A Maya world was a land of dense forests, towering trees, and an endless play of water and sky. In the stillness of night, the forest carried its own rhythm, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of nocturnal birds, and, above all, the soft arrival of rain. To the Maya, rain was not simply weather, it was life itself, seeping into the roots of maize, filling rivers that threaded across the earth, and whispering as it fell through the canopy. Rain shaped the very possibility of civilization in this region. Unlike vast rivers such as the Nile or the Tigris, the Maya lowlands offered no great, constant stream to anchor their lives. Instead, they depended on seasonal rains, on underground wells called cenotes, and on the careful balance of earth and sky. Every drop was precious. Every storm, every cloud, every shimmer of moisture carried meaning. To live in such a landscape was to see rain not as background, but as presence, a presence worthy of reverence. Imagine the still night forest after the heat of day. Darkness folds in with a heavy quiet, and then, from above, drops begin to fall. Each one lands like a small, sacred note. Together they create a rhythm, a song that lulls the earth to rest. The Maya listened to that song and heard more than chants. They heard a conversation between gods and people, a cycle of giving and receiving. For them, the rain did not come alone. It came as the voice and touch of Chaac, the rain god. This understanding of rain as divine transformed daily survival into spiritual practice. When the first rains returned after long months of dryness, they were not merely welcomed as relief but honored as renewal. The forest itself seemed to breathe differently. Streams reawakened. The earth softened. Crops stirred in their fields. Families looked upward with gratitude. Each season's return of water was like the turning of a sacred wheel, binding human lives to forces larger and older than themselves. Archaeologists who study the Maya often describe the delicate balance between abundance and scarcity in this region, without rivers to sustain them year-round. The Maya developed ingenious ways to collect water, reservoirs dug into limestone, channels cut to guide rainfall, and the use of natural sinkholes as sacred wells. Yet beyond their practical skill lay a deeper sense of reverence. The same structures that stored water were often places of worship. Reservoirs might be lined with offerings. Cenotes became ceremonial gateways. The work of managing water was never separate from the work of honoring it. Even the forest itself reflected this dual relationship. Trees thrived in harmony with the rains. The ceiba tree, tall and straight, was sacred to the Maya and thought of as the world tree, its roots descending into the underworld, its branches touching the heavens. Around such trees, rains seemed to linger, feeding the soil and connecting realms. The forest canopy caught the drops, slowed them, and let them fall like blessings into the undergrowth. To walk through the jungle during rainfall was to move through layers of divine touch. The night forest especially carried a sense of mystery. In darkness, sight was limited, and hearing became sharper. Rain could arrive without warning, a shift in air, a coolness settling in, then a sudden drumming on leaves. For the Maya, this unpredictability deepened its sacred quality. Rain could not be fully controlled. It arrived as a gift, sometimes withheld, sometimes abundant, always reminding people of their dependence on powers beyond themselves. In oral traditions, the rain was described in voices and gestures of the gods. Lightning was seen as the stroke of Chaac's axe, splitting clouds to release water. Thunder followed as his voice, resonant and commanding. But the soft patter of gentle rain in the night, that was Chaac's kindness. It was his way of reminding humanity that sustenance and care could come quietly, without spectacle. This duality of storm and stillness mirrored the cycles of life itself, where both struggle and relief belonged to the same order. Modern listeners might hear these beliefs and think of them as distant, bound to another age. Yet even now, the human connection to rain remains powerful. Few experiences are as calming as lying under shelter, listening to steady rainfall. It slows the mind, eases thought, and wraps the listener in a rhythm older than memory. The Maya lived in this rhythm daily, and for them it became a dialogue with the sacred. One could say that their entire civilization was cradled by water that appeared and vanished with the seasons. This fragility inspired not only engineering but ritual, not only survival but gratitude. Their calendars measured the turning of rains. Their festivals marked the first storms. Their gods embodied the forces of cloud and sky. In this way, the Maya transformed a precarious environment into a spiritual landscape, where each raindrop was a reminder of balance. When we imagine the rain in the Maya night forest, we might think not only of survival, but of comfort. The rain cooled the heat of the day, soothed the soil, and promised that crops would rise. Its sound carried across thatched rooftops and over temples, touching both common homes and sacred grounds. For the Maya, rain united all. It fell on kings and farmers alike. It entered both ritual wells and cooking pots. It linked heaven and earth with a thread that could not be broken. And so, in the dark forests where the Maya built their cities, rain became more than water. It became story. It became prayer. It became the quiet presence of Chaac, whose tale we will follow further. For now, it rests as a simple truth. In the silence of night, when drops begin to fall, one can still hear the echo of a God who was never fully lost. What is rain, if not the oldest lullaby the earth knows? Perhaps the Maya heard it first, and gave it a name that carried both awe and gratitude. And as you picture the night forest, you too may feel the same timeless hush, the sound of life, the voice of the sacred, drifting softly through the dark. Chapter 2. The Breath of the Sky. Maya Cosmology. The Maya lived in a world that was never seen as flat or simple. For them, existence was layered, stretched upward and downward like the roots and branches of a great tree. The ceiba, tall and straight, often served as the image of this sacred design. Its roots reached deep into the underworld. Its trunk stood firm in the human realm, and its crown extended into the heavens. To walk through the forest and look at such a tree was not just to see wood and leaves. It was to glimpse the very map of the universe. Maya cosmology described multiple heavens stacked above, and multiple underworlds layered below. The middle ground, the earth where humans lived, was the fragile link between them. This vision was not abstract. It was lived and felt every day. The rising of the sun, the shift of stars, the sudden weight of storms, all were proof that life moved between these levels. To them, existence was not one flat surface, but a breathing structure, alive with cycles. At the center of this design stood the heavens. Accounts from Maya tradition speak of 13 levels of sky, each a realm of different gods, powers, and celestial forces. These heavens were not distant or unreachable. They were stitched into the visible night. The brilliant path of the Milky Way was seen as the great road of souls, a river flowing across the firmament. Stars were not simply lights, but fires of ancestors, signals of divine time, and reminders of eternal presence. Beneath the earth lay the underworld, known as Xibalba. It was not only a place of death, but of trials, transformation, and mysterious rulers. Stories from the Popo Va, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, tell of the hero twins who descended into Xibalba to face challenges set by its lords. The underworld was not final or purely fearful. It was a realm of testing, of shadows and renewal. Its presence beneath the earth reminded the Maya that death was not an end, but a passage into deeper cycles of being. What tied these realms together was not just myth, but natural cycles of rain, growth, and decay. Water, in particular, was the thread that moved through all levels. Rain fell from the sky, seeping into the soil, feeding crops, and eventually vanishing into caverns and rivers underground. To the Maya, this was more than physics. It was the circulation of divine breath, the way gods gave life, reclaimed it, and sent it forth again. Each drop that fell carried a sacred journey, from sky to earth to underworld and back again. The daily and seasonal patterns reinforced this worldview. The sun's rising and setting, its arc across the sky, was the most visible sign of layered existence. Each dawn was a rebirth, each dusk a descent. The rainy season itself was a kind of cosmic rhythm, marking the balance between growth and stillness. When rains failed, it was not only a practical challenge, but a spiritual rupture. To restore balance, rituals were performed. Prayers were offered, and Chaac, the rain god, was invoked to breathe life back into the cycles. One of the striking aspects of Maya cosmology is how it was reflected in their sacred architecture. Temples and pyramids were not merely places of ceremony. They were symbols of cosmic order. Their stepped shapes echoed the layered heavens and underworlds. Climbing a pyramid could be seen as a spiritual ascent, while the tombs built within them symbolized descent. To stand at the top of a temple and gaze at the horizon was to place oneself between sky and earth. Balanced at the very meeting point of the worlds, caves also carried deep meaning. The Maya regarded them as gateways to the underworld, openings where the human world touched the hidden realms below. Many rituals and offerings took place inside such caverns. Even today, in regions once home to Maya cities, caves are places of prayer. Inside them, the dripping of water becomes sacred sound. In silence and darkness, one feels both enclosed and connected, as though standing at a threshold where unseen powers breathe. This layered vision of cosmos also shaped time itself. The Maya were extraordinary timekeepers, crafting calendars that tracked not only solar years, but ritual cycles and celestial patterns. To them, time was not linear, but cyclical. Just as rain returned, just as crops rose and fell, time itself was a turning wheel. The heavens above provided guidance. The movement of planets, especially Venus, marked significant moments. The cycles of the moon and sun offered rhythms for planting, rituals, and prophecy. Time, like rain, was the breath of the gods moving through existence. Yet the Maya never separated the cosmic from the human. They believed their own lives were woven into the same fabric. Kings and priests were often described as mediators, standing at the intersection of worlds. Their rituals, especially those involving bloodletting or sacrifice, were acts meant to sustain cosmic balance. Human offering was not viewed in isolation, but as part of a circulation of life between realms, a return of energy to keep the breath of the sky moving. The worldview can seem vast and unfamiliar, yet at its heart it is deeply human. The Maya sought order and meaning in the patterns around them. They saw in rain a reminder of dependence. They saw in stars a record of time. They saw in caves and cenotes the mystery of what lies beyond. Their cosmology was not a system imposed from outside, but a reflection of the environment they lived in, and the questions they asked. Consider the sensation of standing beneath an open sky after a long dry season, watching clouds form. For the Maya, such a moment was alive with sacred possibility. Was Chaac preparing to release his rains? Would the crops be saved? Was the breath of the gods stirring again? In this way, every shift in weather was a kind of dialogue. Every season a text to be read. Every storm a message from the layered heavens. Archaeological findings show how consistently this worldview shaped daily life. Murals, pottery, and inscriptions depict gods of rain, maize, and sky. Calendar glyphs record celestial cycles with extraordinary precision. The famous Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya books, contains detailed tables of Venus's movement and predictions tied to its cycles. Such records were not only astronomical, they were spiritual guides. To know when Venus would rise or when an eclipse might appear was to understand the breath of the sky itself. Even today, descendants of the Maya carry fragments of this cosmology in their rituals and traditions. In parts of Guatemala and Mexico, offerings are still made to mountains, rivers, and clouds. Farmers still look to the heavens for signs, reading the sky as their ancestors once did. Though centuries have passed, the layered view of cosmos has not vanished. It lingers in the rhythms of life, in the way rain is welcomed, in the way stars are honored. At the heart of this vision lies a quiet truth. The universe is not distant. It is close, layered, and breathing with us. The sky above, the earth beneath, the waters that flow between, all are threads of one fabric. The Maya lived in this fabric with constant awareness, listening to its rhythms, marking its patterns, and shaping their lives to its breath. Perhaps this is why their cosmology still carries a certain calm appeal. It does not separate humanity from nature, nor does it divide the sacred from the ordinary. Instead, it suggests that every drop of rain, every turn of season, every rising star is part of the same story. To reflect on this is to remember that we, too, live in layers between past and future, between earth and sky, between what we know and what we wonder. And so, when the Maya spoke of the breath of the sky, they were not only describing distant heavens, they were describing the very rhythm of life that moves quietly around us still. What is the rain, if not the earth breathing? What are the stars, if not the heavens watching? What is time, if not the endless cycle of sky inhaling and exhaling through us all? The Maya also imagined the cosmos as directional. Each corner of the universe was tied to a color, a tree, and a guardian force. East was red, where the sun rose and renewal began. West was black, the place of descent and endings. North was white, the realm of ancestors and purity. South was yellow, the place of abundance and ripening. At the center was green, the balance of all directions embodied in the ceiba tree itself. To walk through the forest, to see the hues of dawn and dusk, was to move within this sacred compass. The world was not abstractly mapped, it was lived through color, season, and orientation. These cosmic directions guided not only ritual but architecture. Many Maya temples and cities were aligned to the solstices, equinoxes, or to key points on the horizon. At Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan was built so that during equinox sunsets, shadows create the illusion of a serpent descending the steps, a perfect blending of sky, stone, and myth. Such alignments were not decorative. They were a way of placing human life inside cosmic breath, of letting architecture speak the language of heavens and earth together. Rain itself tied into this directional system through the four Chaacs, the rain gods of each direction. Each had a color and a presence, sending rains from the east, west, north, and south. Together they ensured that the cycle of water was balanced. When drought came, rituals often called upon all four, summoning them like winds from the edges of the world. To the Maya, balance between directions was essential. Too much in one, too little in another, and the cosmic breath faltered. Chapter 3. Meeting Chaac. The gentle rain god Chaac was the Maya god of rain. His name, spoken softly in prayer, carried with it both necessity and gratitude. Without him, the maize would wither, the rivers would shrink, and life itself would falter. With him, fields blossomed, villages thrived, and the breath of the sky reached the earth. To understand Chaac is to understand how the Maya saw survival itself, not as a human achievement, but as a gift flowing from the sky's hand. He was often depicted with a long, curling nose, almost like a serpent's snout. In carvings and codices, his face appears with wide staring eyes and fangs, sometimes holding a thunder axe in his grasp. Yet these were not signs of terror. They were symbols of his role as a force that could open the heavens. The axe struck the clouds, and rain poured forth. Where other deities might embody punishment or war, Chaac's role was gentler. He was presence more than threat, rhythm more than command. The Maya believed that Chaac was not singular but fourfold. Each direction of the cosmos had its own Chaac, each painted in the color of its realm, red in the east, black in the west, white in the north, and yellow in the south. These four Chaacs together ensured that rain fell evenly, circling the earth with balance. When drought came, prayers were sent not to one, but to all, asking them to meet in harmony. To live in the Maya world was to be held in the care of these four guardians of water, as if the very sky itself were divided into compassionate hands. Rituals for Chaac often took place near cenotes, the natural sinkholes of the Yucatan. These pools of deep still water were seen as openings to the underworld, but also as the lungs of the earth, places where sky water gathered and descended. Offerings were cast into their depths, jade beads, pottery, sometimes even human lives, all entrusted to Chaac. The still surface of a cenote reflected the sky, reminding worshippers that above and below were bound by the thread of rain. Chaac's presence reached into every aspect of Maya life. Farmers watched the clouds, and listened for the first thunder of the season, taking it as his voice. Children were taught to respect rain, to walk carefully in storms, to see each drop as sacred. The planting of maize was timed to the rains, making Chaac not just a seasonal figure but a companion through each year. His cycles marked the heartbeat of survival. Some depictions showed Chaac riding with serpents, lightning flashing from their bodies. This image may seem fierce, but within Maya thought it was nurturing. Lightning split the sky so that rain could fall. Thunder announced the arrival of nourishment. What others might have feared, the Maya folded into gratitude. Chaac's storms were not threats, but reminders that the sky was alive, listening and giving. In myth, Chaac was also connected to creation. The Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Cache, Maya, tells of gods shaping humans from maize. For maize to grow, rain was essential. Chaac was thus indirectly a giver of humanity itself. To eat was to rely on him. To breathe was to live under his care. The relationship was not abstract. It was immediate, felt in the body each day as food became strength, as water became life. This closeness explains why Chaac's image is carved into temple walls and painted in codices with repetition. He was everywhere because he was everything, not in a dominating sense, but in a nurturing one. If the sun gave light, then Chaac gave sustenance. Together they allowed maize to rise. Together they kept the world from emptiness. We might ask, what does it mean to treat rain as a god? To imagine each storm as a visitation, each drop as a gift. Perhaps it changes the way one walks through the world. Instead of seeing weather as indifferent, the Maya saw it as intimate. Instead of facing nature as separate, they entered into dialogue with it. Chaac's rains were not accidents, but responses. Human prayers, songs, and offerings were part of the same cycle that moved clouds across the sky. The rituals were not only for prosperity, but for balance. Too much rain was as dangerous as too little. Crops could rot, rivers could flood, villages could drown. And so Chaac was not worshipped merely as a bringer, but as a balancer. His gift had to be in measure, neither absence nor excess. This balance carried into the Maya philosophy of life itself, that harmony mattered more than dominance. That survival was not about control, but about respectful relationship. Archaeologists studying Chaac's worship often find layers of offerings beneath temples and in caves. These deposits reveal a patience in devotion. Year after year, generation after generation, people returned to the same sacred places to speak with him. Over centuries, countless hands carried tokens of thanks, lowering them into water or placing them in earth. Such continuity speaks of a God not feared and appeased, but trusted and accompanied. When one stands today before the temple of the warriors at Chichen Itza, or gazes into the sacred cenote, there is a quiet recognition of how deeply the Maya tied their lives to Chaac. The wind moving across the water, the slow roll of thunder on the horizon, these remain unchanged from what the Maya once experienced. In such moments, one can almost hear the echo of ancient prayers, gentle and earnest, rising toward the sky. And in this reflection comes a question. What happens to us when we no longer see rain as sacred? When water becomes only a resource? When storms are measured only in statistics? Does something essential slip away? The Maya remind us that reverence is not naive. It is a way of living awake to dependence, awake to gratitude, awake to the fragile balance that sustains every breath. Chaac, then, is more than a rain god frozen in history. He is a mirror for how humanity once lived in partnership with the sky. His presence is not only carved in stone, but written in the rhythm of clouds and fields. He remains in the cycle that continues today. Rain falling, rivers flowing, crops rising. To meet Chaac is to meet the gentle side of power, strength expressed as care, force expressed as nourishment. He teaches that survival is not taken, but received, and that every drop of rain, even now, carries with it the memory of a God who gave not in fear, but in generosity. Chapter 4. Sacred Offerings. Beneath the surface, beneath the dense green canopy of the Yucatan, the earth opens in unexpected ways. Circular mouths of water appear where the limestone ground has collapsed, revealing deep, still pools. To the Maya, these cenotes were not simply natural features. They were portals, sacred thresholds between worlds, places where the surface met the unseen, where sky and underworld touched through the medium of water. Cenotes became central in the worship of Chaac, the god of rain. If rain was the thread that bound heaven and earth, then the cenotes were the knots tying that thread to the human realm. Standing at the rim of one, with water dark and endless below, the Maya felt themselves close to Chaac's dwelling. To approach a cenote was to step into his presence. Rituals here were solemn and careful. Offerings were not thrown in haste. They were prepared with devotion, carried across jungle paths, and placed into the water with reverence. Archaeological dives into these sacred pools reveal layers of gifts resting on their floors. Jade beads, glinting faintly in the dark. Pottery vessels once filled with food or drink. Tools shaped with deliberate care, and figurines carved to embody prayers. Each object was more than a possession. It was a message, entrusted to Chaac through the silent descent of water, the sacred cenote at Chaac. It remains one of the most studied examples. Stretching nearly 60 meters across and dropping into green depths, it was the stage for centuries of ritual. Spanish chroniclers, writing after the conquest, described how precious objects and sometimes human lives were offered there to secure Chaac's favor. Though their accounts were colored by distance and misunderstanding, excavations confirmed the truth of offerings. Gold discs, jade ornaments, and skeletal remains have been recovered, testifying to the depth of devotion that once gathered at its rim. The Maya did not see these sacrifices as destruction. They saw them as transfers. To cast an object into the cenote was to send it into the care of the gods. Water would carry it into the underworld, where Chaac and other deities could receive it. In return, rain would fall, crops would grow, and the cycle of survival would continue. Not every gift was grand. Many were simple clay vessels, painted with care. A pot lowered into the cenote might have once held tamales or maize gruel, humble offerings transformed into sacred gestures. Some carried incense, its smoke rising before being lowered to rest in the waters below. The variety shows that worship was not restricted to elites. Farmers, artisans, and villagers alike could bring what they had. Shaping devotion into tangible form, the cenote itself was seen as alive. Its water was not still, but listening. Its depths were not empty, but inhabited. Stories told of Chaac dwelling within, ready to hear the prayers of those who approached. The mirror-like surface reflected both the sky above and the faces of those who leaned over it, reminding worshippers that they were always between worlds, mortal and divine. Earth and sky, ceremonies often took place at the turning points of the year. Before planting, prayers were made for rain. In times of drought, rituals grew more urgent with larger gatherings and more precious offerings. The rhythm of the cenote reflected the rhythm of the seasons, always responding to the needs of the people. To live in the Maya world was to live in conversation with water, and the cenote was where that conversation spoke loudest. There were also songs. Some accounts describe chanting at the rim, voices echoing across stone walls, blending with the call of birds and the rustle of trees. The sound must have been haunting, carried into the still air before dissolving into silence. Each note was itself an offering, carried downward into the water's echoing chamber. For listeners, it was not only Chaac who heard, but the ancestors who dwelled in the underworld, joining the ceremony in unseen presence, diving into these cenotes today. Archaeologists describe a strange hush, as if the water itself holds memory. Descending through shafts of green light, they see objects resting quietly where they settled centuries ago. A jade bead the size of a fingertip, once treasured by a family. A copper bell, silent now but once bright with sound. A carved wooden staff, preserved by the still water. Each artifact is a trace of devotion, each one a whisper of faith directed toward Chaac. The presence of human remains in some cenotes has long stirred debate. Were these sacrifices in times of desperation? Were they chosen from captives or honored volunteers? The answers remain uncertain, but the fact of their offering suggests that, at moments of crisis, the Maya believed nothing was too great to give back to the gods. Life itself could be entrusted to Chaac, a gesture both terrifying and deeply reverent. And yet, the cenotes were not places of dread. They were sources of life. They provided drinking water for villagers. They were cool refuges in the heat of the dry season. Children learned to swim in their edges. Animals gathered nearby to drink. To cast offerings into them was not to fear them, but to acknowledge their sacred generosity. In giving, the people mirrored the cenote's own giving. Reflecting on this practice raises gentle questions. What does it mean to offer something precious, not to another person, but to the unseen? To give without expectation of holding it again. In the Maya worldview, this was not loss, but participation. It was a way of weaving human life into the larger fabric of nature and divinity. The cenote was the loom, and the offering was a thread, joining sky, earth, and underworld in continuity. Even now, many cenotes remain active sites of reverence. Local Maya communities continue to treat them with care, acknowledging their sacredness even when tourists arrive to swim. The water is still seen as alive, as something deserving respect. And when rain falls suddenly in the Yucatan, drumming on leaves and filling the cenotes, it is easy to imagine that Chaac still listens, still receives, still gives in return. To look into the still surface of a cenote is to see more than reflection. It is to glimpse the depths of human devotion across centuries, layered gift upon gift, prayer upon prayer. It is to recognize that beneath the surface, offerings remain, quiet and waiting, preserved in the embrace of water. And it is to wonder whether every drop of rain that falls carries with it the memory of those ancient gifts, still rising from below, still nourishing the earth in ways unseen. The cenotes were also part of mythology. In Maya creation stories, water is not merely an element, but the womb from which life emerges. Some myths describe the first maize plant, the sacred sustenance of humanity rising from the damp underworld, nurtured by hidden waters. To return offerings into the cenote was to return to that origin, to honor the place where creation itself was imagined to have begun. In certain communities, cenotes were also tied to ancestral spirits. It was believed that the souls of the departed could linger in watery depths, watching and listening. When families lowered offerings, they were not only addressing Chaac, but also acknowledging the unseen presence of those who had walked before them. The water became a bridge, allowing memory and devotion to mingle. To stand at its edge was to stand in the presence of both gods and ancestors. Both rain and memory. Archaeological records revealed just how varied the offerings were. Some cenotes contain textiles, carefully folded before being submerged. Others hold wooden carvings, astonishingly preserved by the water's chemistry. Shell ornaments and coral pieces, brought from distant coasts, suggest that offerings were not limited to local treasures, but came from wide networks of trade. A single bead of turquoise might have traveled hundreds of miles before sinking into the cenote's embrace. This breadth of objects tells us that Chaac was honored not just with what was abundant, but with what was rare and hard to obtain. Each gift carried meaning far beyond its material value. There is also the quiet symbolism of the cenote's depth. For the Maya, descending into the underworld often meant passing through layers of trial before finding renewal. To drop an offering into water that seemed bottomless was to entrust it to that same journey. The offering did not vanish, it traveled. The slow fall of a jade bead through green light echoed the descent of souls. The journey of rain itself, falling from clouds into soil. These parallels gave each ritual a poetic weight, even if participants did not speak of it in those terms. Spanish accounts often emphasized the drama of sacrifice, but they rarely captured the everyday reverence that surrounded these waters. Farmers may have come quietly at dawn, placing food or flowers into the cenote before beginning their work. Children may have been taught to bow or whisper prayers before drinking from its edge. Such small gestures, repeated over generations, built a living relationship between people and water. It was not only the great ceremonies that bound Chaac and the Maya together, but the countless moments of humble offering, too ordinary for chronicles, but essential in shaping belief. The soundscape of cenotes also mattered. Imagine the drop of a clay vessel into still water, the splash ringing against limestone walls, echoing into silence. That sound itself was part of the ritual, a signal that the offering had been accepted by the depths. Sometimes incense was cast into the water, the smoke rising first, then the vessel sinking down, leaving both fragrance and silence behind. The senses, sight, sound, smell, were woven into devotion, ensuring that memory of the ritual lingered in the body as well as in the mind. Chapter 5. The Four Chaacs of the Winds in the Maya World. Balance was not only a principle of philosophy, it was woven into the breath of daily life, into the way people oriented their fields, their homes, and their prayers. At the center of this balance stood Chaac, not as a single figure, but as for each Chaac was bound to a direction, a wind, and a color, together forming a circle that embraced the world. The four Chaacs were called upon like guardians at the edges of the sky. To the east, Chaac was red, carrying the first light of dawn and the promise of new rains. To the west, Chaac was black, where the sun descended into mystery and storms gathered in shadows. To the north, Chaac was white, the place of ancestors, where cool winds swept across the land. And to the south, Chaac was yellow, the color of ripened maize, abundance, and fulfillment. At the center, their powers intertwined, keeping the earth in harmony. This system was not symbolic only in thought, it was lived. Farmers faced east at planting, invoking the red Chaac to send nurturing showers. Ritual leaders traced circles to the 4 directions, calling each Chaac by name, offering maize, flowers, or incense in turn. When droughts came, ceremonies appealed to all 4, summoning the winds to carry rain from every horizon. The world itself was imagined as a great altar, with the 4 Chaacs standing watch at its corners. The winds they carried were not abstract. Each was felt in the body. The hot breath of the south wind, heavy with summer's heat. The dry currents of the north, cutting cool through the air. The moisture of the east, thick with rain and sea. The shifting clouds of the west, where day fell into night. To the Maya, these winds were not empty movements of air. They were the touch of Chaac himself, felt on the skin, heard in the rustle of leaves, guiding the cycle of life. Colors too shaped the way people saw their world. Red, white, black, yellow. These hues marked not just art and weaving, but sacred order. They were painted on temple walls, carved into ceremonial vessels, embroidered into clothing. Each color carried meaning. To wear red at a ritual was to align with beginnings. To bring yellow maize as an offering was to call upon fulfillment. The 4 colors, combined, formed a sacred pattern, reminding everyone that no direction stood alone. Life thrived only when balance was kept. Archaeological evidence shows that temples, forecourts, and cities were aligned with these directions. The layout of entire sites reflected the geometry of the 4 Chaacs. A visitor walking through such a city was moving through a sacred diagram, each step resonating with cosmic order. Even small villages carried traces of this pattern, with homes facing cardinal points, doors opened to catch winds, and altars placed at intersections where directions met. The landscape itself was shaped to mirror the harmony of the sky. The 4 Chaacs also appear in myths. They are described as brothers, sometimes quarrelsome, sometimes cooperative, their combined efforts producing thunder and storm. When lightning flashed, it was said that Chaac had struck the clouds with his axe, sending rain tumbling down. But which Chaac had struck? The stories varied, reflecting the shifting winds that carried storms from one direction to another. The multiplicity of Chaac revealed the multiplicity of rain, sometimes gentle, sometimes fierce, always necessary. Reflecting on this, one sees a lesson about balance. The Maya did not reduce rain to a single cause, a single god, a single moment. They recognized its diversity, its dependence on shifting winds and directions. Their theology was not narrow but wide, accommodating the complexity of nature. Perhaps this openness explains how their worldview endured across centuries, adapting to change while preserving its sacred rhythm in ceremonies. The 4 Chaacs were often invoked together, but each was honored in sequence. A ritual leader might face east first, lifting prayers to the red dawn, then turn south, acknowledging yellow abundance, then west, where black carried endings and storms, finally north, where white offered coolness and memory. Only when the circle was complete could balance be restored. The ritual was not only for Chaac's ears, it was for the community, reminding them to see life from every side, to walk in harmony with all directions. For the Maya, to neglect one Chaac was to risk imbalance. A farmer who focused only on the east might enjoy early rains but lose the blessings of maturity. A ruler who honored only the north might invoke memory but not growth. The wisdom lay in honoring all, even those whose winds were harsh or difficult. Balance required inclusion, not preference. And so the 4 Chaacs embody a truth that reaches beyond rain. They remind us that the world is never one-sided. Joy and loss, dawn and dusk, memory and hope, all directions must be acknowledged. Just as the winds shift, so must our understanding. The Maya, through the four Chaacs, invite us to see the sacred not in one path, but in the circle of all. To stand at the center of that circle is to feel life as breath itself. Winds meet, colors blend, rains fall. The world, in its fullness, moves around us. And in that still center, one might pause, listening, wondering. If all directions speak, are we ever truly moving alone? The four Chaacs were also guardians of time. In Maya calendars, each day was associated not only with a number and a symbol, but also with a direction. The passing of time itself was imagined as a rotation through the four quarters of the world, with the Chaacs guiding its movement. To rise in the morning was to enter the red east. To labor at midday was to stand beneath the yellow south. To rest in the evening was to pass into the black west. To dream at night was to journey into the white north. In this way, life became a pilgrimage through directions, with Chaacs, winds, guiding every step. Ceremonial specialists, often called rain priests, carried this cosmology in their daily duties. When storms threatened, they did not merely pray for them to pass. They considered which Chaac was speaking and why. A storm from the east might mean a rebirth of crops. A storm from the west could signal endings or the need for preparation. Each wind was a voice, and the priest's role was to listen, to interpret, and to share its meaning with the community. In doing so, the rains became less random, less frightening. They became part of a conversation between people and gods. Archaeologists have uncovered ceremonial altars with offerings, carefully placed in four directions. Shells, jade beads, and obsidian blades lay in patterned arrangements, symbolizing the balance of winds and colors. These were not simple gifts. They were maps of the universe made tangible, miniature worlds where the Chaacs could dwell. To stand before such an altar was to stand before the cosmos itself, compressed into sacred form. One could almost imagine the winds circling above, carrying prayers outward in every direction. There is a quiet beauty in how practical and spiritual thought merged in this worldview. Farmers understood the winds because they lived with them. They watched clouds gather, felt the shift in temperature, learned the signs of coming rains. Yet these observations were not separated from their faith. Instead, they were drawn into a larger pattern of meaning, where every change in weather was also a change in divine presence. The four Chaacs were not separate from nature. They were nature, given voice and character, honored in gratitude. The symbolism of four also touched daily architecture. In Maya homes, hearths were often built with 3 stones, representing a triad of creation. But these stones were placed within a larger framework, the 4 corners of the home aligned to the 4 directions. Even in cooking, in preparing the maize that sustained life, the order of the world was reaffirmed. Each meal carried the blessing of balance, each fire echoing the structure of the sky. Stories told by elders often reminded children of the 4 Chaacs. Some tales warned that neglecting offerings in one direction would bring misfortune. Others spoke of Chaacs appearing as men, disguised as travelers, testing the generosity of households. A gift of water or maize might bring blessings of rain. A refusal might call down drought. These gentle warnings wove morality into cosmology, teaching respect not only for gods, but for strangers, neighbors, and the unseen forces of the world when viewed through modern eyes. The system of 4 Chaacs can seem symbolic, perhaps even abstract, but to the Maya it was as real as the seasons. Just as one feels the difference between a southern breeze and a northern chill, so they felt the presence of each Chaac distinctly. This immediacy kept belief alive, not as distant dogma, but as daily awareness. To live within the 4 directions was to feel constantly connected to the sacred dot. The division of the world into 4 also reflects a deeper human need, the need to make sense of complexity. Rain is unpredictable. Winds shift without warning. Storms bring life, but also destruction. By giving these forces names, colors, and places, the Maya brought them into a pattern that could be understood, honored, and navigated. The 4 Chaacs provided not certainty, but orientation, a way of finding one's place in a world both nurturing and dangerous. Today, when one visits ancient Maya sites, the sense of orientation still lingers. Standing at the center of a ball court or temple plaza, one can feel the intentionality of the design. East and west stretch before the eyes, north and south to either side. The symmetry is quiet but unmistakable, a reminder that life was once lived in conversation with directions, with winds, with Chaac himself. Chapter 6. Rituals of Rain and Renewal. The Maya understood rain not as a background occurrence, but as a divine rhythm. It was life arriving from the sky, fragile yet generous, always awaited with patience and reverence. To call upon Chaac, the giver of showers, they created rituals of great care, blending music, movement, and offerings. These ceremonies were not spectacles designed to overwhelm, but slow rhythms of devotion measured like the fall of raindrops. Steady and essential dot in villages, rituals began with preparation. Maize, the sacred grain, was gathered in baskets, its golden kernels glimmering like stored sunlight. Priests prepared incense made from copal resin, the sweet smoke that was thought to rise toward the heavens as an invisible bridge. Children sometimes carried water in painted gourds, reminders of the life that rain renewed. Each element was chosen not for extravagance, but for meaning. Everything offered had first been a gift from the earth, and in being returned, it closed a circle of gratitude. The dances were slow, deliberate, and patterned. Men and women moved in circular steps, echoing the turning of seasons, the cycle of rain and growth. Some dancers wore masks representing Chaac himself, with long, curling snouts that imitated the path of lightning. The masks were not intended to frighten, but to embody presence, to allow the god to walk briefly among his people. When the masks were lifted at the ritual's end, it was as though the divine had withdrawn, leaving only the quiet faces of neighbors. Humbled by what they had carried, music played a central role in calling the rains. Drums carved from hollowed trunks resounded with deep, steady beats, like distant thunder rolling through the hills. Flutes shaped from bone or clay whistled with tones that recalled the calling of birds before a storm. Rattles, filled with seeds, shook in patterns that resembled falling rain. Together, these sounds created not simply a performance, but an atmosphere. The community was immersed in the soundscape of rain before the first drop had even touched the ground. In some ceremonies, effigies of Chaac were placed at the edge of fields. These figures, sculpted from clay, wood, or stone, received maize gruel poured carefully over them. The offering was both practical and symbolic. Maize, sustained by past rains, now returned as nourishment for the god who gave it. Sometimes live animals, such as birds, were released into the sky. Their wings beating upward were thought to carry the prayer higher. Like living messengers sent into the clouds, the most solemn offerings took place at cenotes, the sacred water-filled sinkholes. Here, priests lowered vessels of jade, shells, and woven cloth into the depths. Some of these offerings still rest at the bottom today, silent witnesses to centuries of devotion. The cenotes were seen as portals, thresholds between the human world and the watery dwelling places of Chaac and other spirits. To drop an offering into their depths was to give directly into the gods' hands. Children, too, were sometimes central to these ceremonies. Their innocence was believed to be especially powerful, their tears a symbol of the rains themselves. When children participated by carrying torches or singing chants, their voices carried a purity that adults could not. The connection between tears and rain lingered deeply in Maya thought. Both were waters of life, both marked by cycles of joy and sorrow. The timing of rituals was carefully aligned with the calendar. The Maya tracked seasons with precision, noting the first stirrings of clouds, the shifts in wind, the position of the sun on the horizon. Rituals of rain were not performed randomly, but at moments of threshold, the onset of planting, the approach of the wet season, the anxious weeks when crops awaited water. To act at the right time was itself a form of harmony, a way of showing respect for the cosmic order. What is striking in these ceremonies is their gentleness. Unlike traditions that called upon storm gods with fear or demanded harsh sacrifices, Chaac was approached with patience and reverence. The rituals did not attempt to command the rains, but to invite them. The Maya knew they could not control the sky. They could only align themselves with its cycles, showing gratitude, making offerings, dancing prayers into the earth until the clouds chose to answer. This gentleness reveals a deeper philosophy that humans are not rulers of nature, but participants in it. The rituals of rain remind us that survival depends not on mastery, but on cooperation. By giving maize back, by shaping dances around the winds, by releasing smoke into the air, the Maya affirmed their place within a larger cycle of exchange. They were never outside the rain, never separate from it. They lived within its rhythm, and their rituals reflected that belonging. One can imagine the closing of such a ceremony, the music fading, the dancers pausing, the last curls of incense rising into the still air. The community waiting in silence, eyes lifted toward the horizon, not demanding, not doubting, but waiting, as if in dialogue with the sky. And then, perhaps later that night or the next day, the sound of rain returning, soft at first, then steady, covering the thatched roofs, filling the fields, sinking into the soil. Were these rituals truly answered by Chaac? Or was their power found in the unity they created, the shared trust that gave strength during uncertainty? Perhaps the truth lies in both. For whether the god was moved or whether the people themselves found resilience through ritual, the rains came and life continued. The Maya never separated the practical from the sacred. To call for rain was not only an act of survival, but an act of reverence. Each offering, each dance, each song of devotion was a reminder that life is always dependent on gifts beyond our control. And in honoring those gifts, the Maya shaped a worldview of humility and gratitude. Even now, to stand in the remnants of a Maya city during the wet season, to hear the rain falling on ancient stones, is to feel something of that rhythm. The sound is the same one their ancestors knew, the same one they honored through centuries of ritual. It is a continuity that speaks softly across time, reminding us that rain is more than water. It is renewal, a breath from the sky, a sacred thread that ties humanity to the earth. And perhaps the true question remains, when the rains fall today, do we still listen? Do we hear them as the Maya once did, as a voice, as a presence, as something worthy of offering and awe? Or have we allowed the rhythm to pass us by, unnoticed in the noise of modern life? For the Maya, each drop carried meaning. Each storm was an answer. Each ritual of rain was not just about survival, but about belonging to the world itself. Chapter 7. The Quiet Power of Water. Water has always been more than a physical need. It is a mystery, an essence, a thread woven into the fabric of life itself. For the Maya, water was not only a resource, but a sacred current flowing between the human world and the divine. It was Chaac's touch upon the earth, the gentle reminder that all living things are bound together by the same fragile element. Without water, no maize could grow, no forest could flourish, no village could endure. With water, the land was renewed, the body was sustained, and the soul was given the chance to continue its journey, in Maya thought. Water was everywhere at once, falling from the sky, running through rivers, hidden in cenotes, pooled in reservoirs, carried within the veins of plants and the flesh of human beings. Its presence blurred the line between necessity and divinity. To drink water was to accept a gift from Chaac. To see rain clouds gather was to watch divinity take form above the horizon. The act of bathing, irrigating, or even washing hands was never wholly ordinary. For water itself carried sacred weight. Philosophically, the Maya saw water as part of an eternal cycle. It rose into clouds, fell as rain, soaked into the ground, flowed as rivers, and returned again. This cycle mirrored human life and death. Just as a person was born, lived, and returned to the earth, water traveled endlessly between forms. In this rhythm, the Maya recognized an echo of their own mortality and renewal. They did not view water as something conquered, but as something joined, a cycle to which they too belonged. Water was also deeply tied to the spiritual geography of their world. The rivers were lifelines that connected villages, carrying not only trade but also stories and myths. Cenotes were seen as portals into the underworld, dark mouths of stone where one could reach into other realms. Rainfall itself was considered a direct descent of divine essence, a reminder that heaven and earth were never fully separated. In this way, water was not only an element, but a map, guiding the Maya through layers of existence. Archaeologists today uncover vessels and artifacts carefully placed in water-filled caves. Some contain jade beads, shells, and ceramics offered to Chaac. These objects remind us that water was never neutral. It was a stage upon which exchanges with the gods were carried out. To drop jade into a cenote was not only a symbolic act, it was a surrender of wealth into the flowing hands of divinity. The water itself became the messenger, carrying human devotion into unseen depths. What is striking is how water, though soft, carried power without force. It carved valleys, shaped caves, and nourished roots that split stone. For the Maya, this quiet strength mirrored the nature of divinity itself. Chaac was not a god of sudden destruction, though storms could be fierce. He was primarily a god of persistence, of cycles, of steady renewal. His power was not always loud, but was always essential. The rains could be delayed, but they could not be denied forever. One might ask, why was water so often personified, given face and name? Perhaps because to see water as sacred was to acknowledge dependence. In human pride, there is a tendency to forget that life relies on what cannot be manufactured. Water humbled the Maya, as it humbles us still. No city, no king, no temple could stand without it. In calling it divine, they honored the truth of vulnerability. The reminder that even the strongest structures crumble without the soft touch of rain. Water also shaped time itself. Agricultural calendars were guided by its rhythm, planting with the rains, harvesting with the dry season. Festivals aligned with the movement of clouds, the filling of rivers, the opening of skies. The sound of rain on thatched roofs marked the arrival of seasons, while the silence of drought marked danger. In this way, water did not only nourish fields, but shaped the very sense of rhythm by which communities lived. There is something profoundly meditative in this way of thinking, to see water not as background but as central, to notice its quiet arrival, its patient flow, its withdrawal and return. The Maya teach us to listen to it, to see in each drop a fragment of eternity. It is an invitation to slow down, to acknowledge the sacredness of what sustains us daily. And so, water becomes both mirror and teacher. It reflects the cycles of life, reminding us of birth, growth, and death. It instructs through its persistence, showing that gentleness can carve even the hardest stone. It carries memory, flowing across landscapes as it once flowed across ancient cities. And in every form, rain, river, cenote, or tear, it whispers the same truth, that life is always dependent on what seems most fragile, and that fragility is, in the end, the source of enduring strength. To the Maya, Chaac embodied this mystery. He was the gentle god of rain, but through him they saw the deeper power of water itself. It was necessity turned into divinity, a reminder that what sustains us daily is also what shapes us eternally. And as the rains fell across fields of maize, as rivers moved silently through the jungle, as cenotes held their still depths, the Maya recognized water not simply as resource, but as presence, quiet, eternal, and divine. Even now, when the sound of rain falls outside your window, perhaps you can hear something of this truth. Each drop carries the weight of ancient reverence. Each stream holds echoes of offerings and prayers long forgotten. And the question remains, do we still treat water as sacred, or have we let its quiet power pass unnoticed, lost in the noise of our lives? Water was not only sacred in its presence, but also in its absence. Drought was one of the most feared experiences for Maya communities. Crops withered, rivers thinned, and cenotes fell silent. When rains delayed their arrival, the people interpreted it as a form of cosmic imbalance, a signal that something had disrupted the harmony between human beings and the gods. In those moments, rituals became even more urgent, as offerings were made with trembling hope. Yet even in fear, water was never viewed as an enemy. Its absence deepened reverence, reminding the Maya of its indispensable place in life's fragile balance. To manage this delicate gift, the Maya built remarkable systems of water control. At sites like Tikal and Palenque, engineers designed vast reservoirs that caught rainfall, ensuring that cities could thrive even during dry months. Canals guided runoff, while stone-lined systems stored precious supplies. Some of these reservoirs were so large they could sustain thousands of people. They were not merely functional, but often shaped with ritual significance, reflecting the belief that storing water was itself a sacred act. To preserve the gift of rain was to honor Chaac, making engineering and devotion inseparable. Archaeologists studying these reservoirs have found traces of offerings placed directly into the water, small vessels carved figurines, fragments of jade. This suggests that the act of drawing water was also an act of reverence. People did not simply take from the reservoirs. They gave something back, a symbolic gesture acknowledging that water remained a divine loan rather than human property. The technology itself was sophisticated, yet it was infused with spiritual humility. The cenotes were especially powerful symbols of this reverence. In places like Chichen Itza, the sacred cenote became a site of extraordinary offerings. Objects of gold, turquoise, and copper, alongside pottery and textiles, were carefully lowered into the depths. These waters were considered a threshold, where Chaac and other spirits could hear human voices most directly. For the Maya cenotes were not just geological formations. They were sacred mouths of the earth, passages into the unseen. To look into their still waters was to gaze into another world, a reminder that what nourishes the body also nourishes the soul. The Maya also held a philosophical understanding of water's duality. It was life-giving, yet it could also destroy. Floods swept through valleys, storms flattened crops, hurricanes tore across coastlines. Chaac was both gentle and fierce, mirroring the unpredictable character of water itself. Yet this unpredictability was accepted as part of the cosmic order. Rather than rejecting the destructive side of water, the Maya absorbed it into their worldview. Storms were not punishments in the modern sense of wrath. They were reminders of balance, teaching that creation and destruction, nourishment and danger are inseparable. Water also carried a moral dimension in Maya thought. To misuse it, to neglect offerings, or to take it for granted was to risk imbalance. Oral traditions suggest that communities sometimes explained droughts as the result of human negligence or disrespect toward Chaac. This belief reinforced ethical responsibility. Water was not guaranteed. It was relational, a gift that required continual recognition. In this sense, caring for water was not only practical but also spiritual, a discipline that kept human beings attentive to their dependence on forces beyond control. The symbolic role of water extended into Maya art and writing. In painted codices, Chaac is often shown wielding a lightning axe, releasing rain from clouds. Streams and droplets flow from his hands, surrounding him like extensions of his essence. In stone carvings, flowing lines represent water's constant movement, often linked to fertility symbols like maize and serpents. These images were not decorative but instructional. They taught observers to see water as the central element binding gods, humans, and the earth together. Chapter 8. Myths of Storm and Stillness. The Maya lived within a landscape where the sky could change suddenly. A horizon of calm blue could, within an hour, darken into thunder. Gentle rains that refreshed maize fields could turn, without warning, into torrents that swept away huts and paths. For the Maya, these shifts were not random. They were expressions of Chaac's presence, the god of rain, of lightning, of clouds, whose moods shaped the world. One of the most enduring myths tells of Chaac striking the clouds with his lightning axe. Each strike split the sky open, releasing rain. The sound of thunder was his voice, rolling across the hills. Sometimes the strikes were steady, measured, each one followed by soft showers that nourished the crops. At other times, the strikes came with anger, splitting trees and shaking the earth. The people did not imagine this as wrath in the human sense. It was rhythm, the natural shifting of cycles, gentleness and fury, stillness and storm existing together in the Popol Vuh. The great Maya text, Storms are described as both creative and destructive forces. The gods sent floods and tempests during the early ages of creation, not as vengeance, but as correction. The first attempts at making human beings failed. Those made of mud crumbled. Those of wood had no hearts. To clear the earth for a new beginning, storms swept them away. In this telling, rain and wind are not enemies. They are the means through which the world renews itself, preparing the ground for life that is more complete. Another story speaks of Chaac working alongside the Bacchus for deities placed at the corners of the world, each holding up the sky. When the Bacchus shifted their weight or grew weary, storms shook the heavens. Chaac's lightning lit their movements, and the rains came down in sudden bursts. The story suggests that what feels like chaos to humans is in fact part of a cosmic balance, a pattern larger than any single storm. Among coastal communities, fishermen told stories of Chaac walking across the sea, stirring the waters with his staff. Where he walked, waves rose and winds swirled. To sailors, this was not a warning to stay away, but a reminder to respect the sea's moods. Calm waters were a gift, but storms were not betrayal. They were the sea's way of speaking, shaped by the same divinity that sent nourishing rain to the cornfields inland. These myths remind us that the Maya rarely divided nature into categories of good and bad. Storms were frightening, yes. They could destroy homes, ruin harvests, even take lives. Yet they were never framed as punishments for moral failings. Instead, they were part of the same divine cycle that made maize grow tall and rivers flow clear. To live with Chaac was to live with uncertainty, and to accept that uncertainty as natural. Ceremonies reflected this philosophy. Before planting season, offerings of maize, cacao, and incense were made to Chaac, asking for gentle rains. But during storms, prayers were not cries of fear so much as acknowledgments of power. Families gathered inside, listening to thunder as if it were a voice. The lightning was not an enemy. It was a message that balance was being restored in ways too vast for humans to see. There is a quiet wisdom in these stories. They tell us that stillness and storm are not opposites, but partners. One cannot exist without the other. Gentle rain feels sacred because storms remind us of its fragility. Clear skies feel like blessings because dark clouds teach us how quickly the world can change. The Maya myths of Chaac reflect this rhythm, guiding people not toward control but toward acceptance. One can imagine sitting in a Maya village centuries ago, the air thick with humidity as clouds gather on the horizon. Children pause in their play. Farmers glance upward, gauging whether it will be a light shower or a fierce tempest. The first flash of lightning cracks across the sky. Some may smile, knowing the maize will drink. Others may worry, remembering how storms once tore through their roofs. Yet all shared the same understanding. This is Chaac's presence. Unpredictable, yet necessary. In the hush after a storm, when leaves drip with fresh rain and the air feels washed clean, the myths take on their full meaning. Storms are not endings, they are passages. They give way to calm, to renewal, to the smell of earth ready for planting again. To the Maya, every cycle of storm and stillness was a reminder that life itself is woven from change. And so, the myths of Chaac endure not as warnings of divine wrath, but as lessons in balance. They teach us to see the storm as teacher, the rain as gift, and the silence after thunder as a sacred pause. Perhaps in listening to them today, we too can learn to embrace the rhythm of nature, its gentleness, its fury, and its quiet, endless renewal. Chapter 9. children of the maize and the rain. For the Maya, maize was more than food. It was life itself, the sacred crop at the center of their existence. Every kernel planted in the earth carried with it a story of origin, a reminder that humanity was born from maize dough shaped by the hands of the gods. To eat was not simply to be nourished. It was to partake in the very substance of creation. And if maize was the body of life, rain was its breath. Without Chaac, no stalk could rise, no harvest could ripen. The bond between maize and rain was not abstract. It was visible, immediate, and absolute. Every season the people looked to the sky, waiting for Chaac's clouds to gather. When the rains came, the maize grew tall and golden. When the rains withheld, fields cracked and hunger spread. This dependence carved a relationship of intimacy between deity and crop, between sky and earth. The Popover tells us that the gods first shaped humans from maize dough, mixing the white and yellow kernels with water. The result was flesh and blood, bone and spirit. Humanity itself was born as a child of both maize and water, gifts inseparably tied. Rain softened the kernels, and maize gave form to life. The story reflects more than myth. It reflects the agricultural truth of a people whose very survival depended on this union. Across the Maya world, rituals honored this sacred bond. Before planting, farmers scattered offerings of maize and cacao on the soil, whispering prayers to Chaac. They asked him to open the skies at the right moment, not too early and not too late. When the young stalks appeared, dances were held to celebrate their fragile beginning. Villagers moved in slow, rhythmic steps, imitating the sway of the plants in the wind, acknowledging how closely their lives mirrored the crop's growth. During harvest, ceremonies gave thanks for both maize and rain. Families gathered around altars, offering the first ears of corn to Chaac. These were not offerings of fear, but of gratitude. Each golden ear was a reminder that the rains had been kind, that Chaac had remembered his children. To taste the first kernels roasted on the fire was to taste a sacred promise. Fulfilled, the connection extended into daily life. Every meal began with maize, whether as tortillas, tamales, or gruel. To eat was to affirm the bond between earth, sky, and human. Each bite carried the memory of rain falling on tilled soil, of Chaac's lightning splitting the clouds, of farmers kneeling in prayer at the edge of the fields. The act of eating was itself a ritual of remembrance, but the bond was not without tension. Droughts haunted the Maya imagination. When rains failed, it was not seen as cruelty, but as distance. The people would turn to Chaac with greater devotion, holding ceremonies at cenotes and hilltop shrines. Priests chanted long prayers, offering food, incense, and sometimes lives, pleading for the return of the rains. These acts revealed how deeply intertwined maize and rain were. One could not be separated from the other. Archaeological evidence tells us much about this devotion. Vessels decorated with images of maize gods and Chaac have been uncovered. Their painted scenes showing streams of rain falling onto ripening fields. Stone altars carved with ears of corn stand as testimony to a worldview where agriculture was not only survival, but divinity made visible. The people saw themselves reflected in these symbols, fragile beings, shaped by maize and sustained by rain. Philosophically, this bond also spoke to the nature of human dependence. The Maya did not see themselves as masters of the land. They were children of it. To be born from maize was to acknowledge one's vulnerability, one's need for what lay beyond control. Rain could not be commanded. It could only be asked for, welcomed, and received with humility. The rituals of Chaac reminded the people of their place in the balance of life. If one listens closely, there is a universal message here. To be a child of maize and rain is to recognize that life is a gift shaped by forces larger than ourselves. Every meal, every harvest, every drop of water becomes part of that cycle. Even in times of hardship, the Maya myths offered reassurance. Just as drought eventually yields to rain, so too does difficulty give way to renewal in quiet moments after the rains. When the fields glistened and young maize shimmered in the breeze, the Maya would have felt this truth deeply. They were not only cultivators of the earth, they were participants in a sacred relationship woven into a fabric of sky, soil, and spirit. And so, the story of Chaac and maize remains one of the most tender in Maya belief. It tells us that nourishment is not merely physical. It is spiritual, a reminder of where we come from and what sustains us. The Maya did not simply grow maize. They grew themselves, generation after generation, as children of the maize and the rain. Even today, the rustling of a cornfield in the wind can feel like a voice, soft, persistent, reminding us that life itself is both fragile and enduring. The Maya heard that voice, and in it they recognized their origin. Perhaps the question lingers still. If humanity is born of maize and rain, what does it mean to live in gratitude for every drop and for every kernel? Even today, the rustling of a cornfield in the wind can feel like a voice, soft, persistent, reminding us that life itself is both fragile and enduring. The Maya heard that voice, and in it they recognized their origin. Perhaps the question lingers still. If humanity is born of maize and rain, what does it mean to live in gratitude for every drop and for every kernel? For the Maya, gratitude was not a passing feeling, but a discipline woven into their lives. Each planting season, each harvest, each meal prepared in the home was part of a sacred rhythm of thankfulness. When a mother patted maize dough into a tortilla and laid it on a clay griddle, she was not merely feeding her children, she was participating in a ritual that stretched back thousands of years. The act itself was an offering, a silent acknowledgement of Chaac's rains and the earth's fertile generosity. This sense of reverence extended even to the way maize was treated after meals. Leftover kernels were never discarded carelessly. To waste corn was to dishonor the gods. Stories were told of spirits who wept when grains were trampled. For each kernel was seen as alive, holding within it the essence of creation. Children were taught to pick up every grain that fell, not simply out of thrift, but because each one was sacred in this way. The daily and the divine blended seamlessly. The field and the temple were not separate realms. The family hearth, the grinding stone, the planting stick, these were tools of survival, but also tools of worship. Through them, the people lived in a state of continual offering. The relationship between Chaac, maize, and humanity was also expressed in festivals. In many regions, annual ceremonies still reenact the gift of rain and corn. Dancers wear headdresses of maize leaves, their steps echoing the bending of stalks in the breeze. Songs recall the sound of rainfall, voices rising and falling like thunderclouds approaching from the horizon. These are not performances for entertainment, but embodiments of memory, ways of carrying forward the covenant between humans and the forces that nourish them. Some myths even spoke of maize as a child carried within the arms of Chaac, the rain gods. Tears of thunder were said to awaken the seeds, his lightning splitting the sky to release their hidden life. In this imagery lies a tender truth. The gods themselves were imagined as caretakers, nurturing humanity not out of fear but out of kinship. Chaac was not distant, but present in every cloud and every storm, sustaining the fragile bodies of those he had helped create. To pause and reflect on this is to sense how different the Maya understanding was from many modern views. For them, nourishment was not a commodity to be bought and sold, but a sacred gift shared freely between gods, earth, and people. Food was not only survival, but relationship. And in that relationship, every raindrop carried meaning. Every ear of maize carried memory, even now. If one walks through the Maya highlands at dawn during the planting season, the smell of wet earth and the sight of young maize sprouting from the soil tell a story that has never ended. The farmers bend low, placing their trust in the rains. The clouds gather, and in the quiet space between thunder and silence, one can almost hear the same question their ancestors whispered centuries ago. Will Chaac remember us this year? And perhaps, as the rain begins to fall, the answer is already there, not in words, but in the gentle rhythm of water striking leaves, promising once more that life will endure. Chapter 10: Chaac's Sacred Symbols. In the sacred imagery of the Maya world, gods were not distant abstractions, but living presences carved into stone, painted on pottery, and woven into ritual objects. Among these divine figures, Chaac was one of the most vividly depicted. His symbols were clear yet layered, simple to recognize, but deep with meaning. To study his images is to step into a quiet conversation between the Maya and the forces of rain, storm, and renewal. One of the most striking features was Chaac's lightning axe. In many depictions, this axe was not held in his hand, but formed part of his very body, a symbol inseparable from his identity. It was said that with this weapon, he could strike the clouds, splitting them open so that rain might fall upon the earth. The lightning axe was not only an emblem of power, but also of transformation. For every bolt that lit the sky carried both danger and blessing. It could destroy, yet it also opened the heavens to life-giving water. In this duality, the Maya saw the balance of nature itself, creation and destruction bound together in one gesture. The serpent, too, was never far from Chaac's image. Serpents were sacred across Mesoamerica, embodying the energy of water, fertility, and the movement of the sky. In Chaac's iconography, serpents sometimes curled from his mouth, representing the streaming of rain, or coiled around him like living rivers. Their scales shimmered in painted murals, often colored in blues and greens to suggest the hues of water and vegetation. Some myths even told of Chaac wielding serpents as his weapons, hurling them across the sky as thunderbolts. To the Maya, this was not mere ornamentation, but an explanation of the storm itself. What others might hear as the crack of thunder, they understood as the voice of serpents unleashed by the rain god. Another detail that marked Chaac was his eyes, often rendered with round, droplet-like forms. These eyes, wide and watchful, seemed always filled with moisture, as though rain itself gathered in their gaze. In stone carvings, they appear almost swollen, a sign of the god's eternal connection to water. Some scholars suggest that these droplet eyes symbolized his tears, an image that resonates with the belief that rain is both a gift and an expression of divine sorrow. To imagine Chaac's tears falling upon the earth is to recognize rain as more than weather. It becomes an intimate act of sharing, a divine outpouring of emotion into the soil of human life. Chaac's long, hooked nose is another feature repeated across countless depictions. Curving downward like a gutter or spout, it channeled water in symbolic form. Archaeologists studying Maya temples have noticed how this shape echoes architectural designs meant to control the flow of rain from rooftops. In this way, Chaac's very face became a reminder of rain's movement, collected, guided, and released. Every carving of his profile thus embodied the practical and the mystical, the human engineering of water and the divine orchestration of storms. Across regions, Chaac's image shifted yet remained recognizable. In Yucatan, he was often shown with mosaic masks adorning the corners of temples. Each mask layered one upon the other in repeating patterns. These masks sometimes lined entire facades, creating walls of Chaac faces staring out at the sky. When rain clouds gathered, the faces seemed to watch intently, waiting for the god's own blessing to descend. In the highlands, however, Chaac symbols blended with local traditions, his serpent imagery merging with mountain deities and ancestral spirits. This fluidity reminds us that symbols are not static. They live, adapt, and absorb the spirit of each place. To walk among these carvings, whether in Uzmal Kaaba or Chichen Itza, is to feel surrounded by the god himself. The repetition of his symbols across the architecture suggests not only devotion but also reassurance. By covering their sacred spaces with Chaac's eyes, noses, and lightning axes, the Maya were embedding reminders of his constant presence. Just as rain falls again and again, so his image appeared without end. The reflective heart of these symbols lies in their blending of natural observation and divine imagination. The lightning axe mirrored the flash of storms. The serpent embodied the twisting movement of water. The droplet eyes echoed the fall of rain. In each case, the Maya were not inventing fantasies but translating nature into sacred language. They were saying, in effect, "Here is what we see, and here is what it means." Perhaps there is something to learn from this way of seeing. In the modern world, storms may be measured in millimeters of rainfall or strikes of lightning per minute. But for the Maya, each flash and drop was a sign, a story, a gesture from a god. To them, the world was not silent, but speaking constantly through symbols. And by carving those symbols into stone, they ensured that the dialogue would continue for generations. To reflect on Chaac's symbols is also to reflect on our own ways of perceiving the natural world. Do we see rain as only water, or can we still sense in it a deeper presence? When thunder shakes the sky, do we imagine only air pressure and electricity, or can we pause to wonder at the mystery it once carried? These questions do not ask us to return to ancient belief, but to notice how meaning can soften even the most ordinary elements of life. Chaac's iconography endures not just as art, but as an invitation. Each symbol opens a quiet space for reflection. The axe that both divides and nourishes, the serpent that slithers between danger and blessing, the eyes that weep and watch, the nose that channels the flow of life. Together, they form a language of rain, a way of remembering that survival depends on forces beyond human control, yet never beyond human gratitude. And so, when the rains fall and the thunder rolls, one might close their eyes and imagine not just weather, but symbols unfolding across the sky. A serpent flashing its body in lightning, an axe striking clouds open, tears of a god spilling onto thirsty fields. In such moments, the ancient world is not gone. It is alive, flowing quietly beneath the surface of our own. Chapter 11. The Voice of Thunder. To the Maya, thunder was not random noise echoing across the sky. It was a voice, strong, resonant, and filled with meaning. In every storm, they heard the presence of Chaac, speaking not in words but in sound. What others might dismiss as a mere clash of clouds, the Maya treated as divine communication. It was guidance carried on the air, a reminder of the God who watched over their fields and their survival. Thunder came in many tones. Sometimes it rolled low and steady, as if rumbling across distant mountains. At other times it cracked sharply, splitting the air with sudden force. Each variation could be read, not unlike the way a farmer reads changes in the wind or a healer listens to the pulse of the body. A deep, lingering thunder might be taken as a sign of abundance, promising rains that would soak the soil. A sharp, angry strike might caution of storms that could damage crops or bring floods. In this way, thunder was not simply background to the rain. It was the language of Chaac himself. The lightning axe was understood as the action, the visible gesture of the god, but thunder was the voice that followed. This pattern mirrored human life, where action and speech are often linked. A gesture is seen, and then words give it meaning. For the Maya, lightning and thunder carried the same sequence, a bolt splitting the sky, and then the voice rolling after it. They recognized in this rhythm a kind of cosmic dialogue, as though Chaac's every strike was followed by explanation. The Maya were not alone in hearing divinity in thunder. Across cultures, the sound has long been treated as the voice of the heavens. The Greeks imagined Zeus speaking through thunderbolts. The Norse spoke of Thor's hammer crashing in the storm. Yet the Maya interpretation was distinct in its balance. Thunder was not only a sign of power. It was not framed solely as warning or punishment. Instead, it was an expression of relationship, a sound that reminded the people of their dependence on Chaac's care. This interpretation softened the experience of storms. For many, thunder can feel overwhelming, even frightening. It's sudden. Force interrupts silence, rattles walls, and makes the ground tremble. But for the Maya, that disruption was not meaningless. It was reassurance that Chaac was present. Just as a parent raises their voice to call out to children, so too did the rain god make himself known through thunder. The sound carried authority, yet also familiarity. It was not something to hide from, but something to listen to. Imagine the scene. A Maya community gathers near their fields. Dark clouds build over the horizon. First comes the flicker of lightning, a jagged line across the sky. Then, moments later, the thunder arrives, low and resonant. To us, it may sound like mere weather. To them, it was Chaac's reminder. The rains are near, prepared to receive them. Children would look up, elders would nod knowingly, and the rhythm of life would align itself once again with the voice above. In sacred rituals, thunder was sometimes invoked directly. Shamans and priests called upon Chaac with chants that echoed the rumbling patterns of storms. Drums were struck to mimic the rolling sound. Shell trumpets blew across temple courtyards, their deep notes carrying far into the distance. These human-made sounds did not attempt to replace thunder, but to harmonize with it, to join in the god's voice. By weaving ritual with the rhythms of nature, the Maya expressed their desire not to command Chaac, but to be in conversation with him. There is also a subtle philosophy hidden in this interpretation. To hear thunder as speech is to live in a world that is always speaking. It is to believe that nature itself is alive with meaning, that nothing is silent or empty. The forest whispers in the rustle of leaves. The rivers murmur in their flow, and the sky speaks in thunder. To live with such a worldview is to feel constantly addressed, constantly reminded of one's place in the cycle of life. It is a vision in which humanity is never alone, never forgotten, always part of a larger dialogue. Perhaps this is why the sound of thunder still stirs us, even when stripped of its divine associations. It resonates deep in the chest. It calls attention, demands pause. It is more than mere vibration. It feels like presence. The Maya explanation offers a way to understand this sensation. We are moved by thunder because, at some deep level, it feels like being spoken to. The quiet beauty of this belief is its reassurance. Thunder, in many cultures, has been treated as a threat, a warning from an angry god, or a punishment sent down from the sky. But in the Maya imagination, it was softened into guidance. The sound did not mark wrath, but relationship. It was not a scolding voice, but a steady one, reminding the people of what truly mattered: rain for the maize, water for survival, balance between humanity and the natural world. This interpretation also reveals something about how the Maya navigated fear. Rather than hiding from the storm, they wove it into meaning. Rather than treating thunder as chaos, they gave it a voice. It is a profound human act to take the unknown and translate it into relationship. In that act, fear becomes reverence, and anxiety turns to listening. And so, the next time thunder shakes the horizon, one might pause and wonder, if it is a voice, what is it saying? Is it simply sound, or is it still a kind of reminder, carried across centuries from a people who saw meaning in every storm? The Maya believed it was Chaac, present and near. Perhaps the question that remains is not whether thunder truly speaks, but whether we are still listening. Even after the storm has passed, thunder leaves a kind of echo in the mind. The Maya likely felt this too, in the silence that followed. The memory of Chaac's voice lingered, like a faint vibration still humming in the chest. Farmers might glance at the dampened soil, reassured that the dialogue had been fruitful. Children might replay the rumble in their imagination, as if carrying Chaac's words with them into dreams. In this way, thunder was not just sound. The moment it was presence carried forward, shaping how people remembered and understood their place beneath the sky. In inscriptions and painted codices, thunder was often paired with imagery of serpents and rain. Serpents curled across the margins of Mayan manuscripts, their sinuous forms echoing the rolling path of thunder across the heavens. In some depictions, Chaac himself emerges from the jaws of a celestial serpent, wielding his lightning axe. The serpent's body curls across the clouds, and its open mouth seems to release both lightning and the thunder that follows. This visual link deepened the sense that thunder was not only noise, but a living current, a ripple of divine energy moving through the atmosphere. Rituals, too, reflected this belief. During ceremonies meant to call the rains, priests sometimes raised their voices in deliberate mimicry of thunder. They sang in tones that rose and fell, stretched and rumbled, echoing the rhythms of the storm. In doing so, they were not only calling for Chaac's blessing but participating in his voice. The act was not about imitation for its own sake, but about recognition, a way of saying, "We hear you, we echo you, we join in your speech." This mirrored a broader principle in Maya spirituality. To align with nature was not to dominate it, but to speak its language as faithfully as possible. This raises an intriguing thought. What does it mean to believe the world is speaking? To you, for the Maya, every sound carried the possibility of divine meaning. Thunder was the most obvious, dramatic example, but it was not alone. The croak of frogs before rainfall, the rustle of maize leaves in the wind, even the call of certain birds, all were understood as signals. signs, or voices woven into the larger conversation of existence. Thunder, however, was the loudest and clearest, the voice that no one could ignore. There is also a balance in the way the Maya received thunder. It was never a one-sided monologue. If Chaac spoke through thunder, then humans responded through ritual. The dialogue between God and people was constant, shaped by offerings, prayers, and ceremonies. When thunder rolled across the sky, it was as if a question had been asked. When the community gathered at the temple, lighting incense and raising chants, it was their answer. Silence too was part of the exchange, the patient listening that followed. When people turned their attention to the heavens, waiting to see what would come next, modern ears may hear thunder differently. We describe it in terms of pressure, sound waves, and atmospheric conditions. Science explains its cause, but even with knowledge, the emotional effect remains. Thunder still startles, still captivates, still feels larger than life. Perhaps this is why the Maya's interpretation resonates across time. To think of thunder as speech reminds us that understanding does not erase wonder. We may know how it is formed, but we can still feel its weight as something more than a physical event. In a world filled with so much noise, the sound of thunder remains distinct. It silences conversation, draws attention upward, and demands a moment of pause. For the Maya, that pause was sacred. It was the moment in which human voices ceased, and the god's voice was heard instead. Such a worldview transforms storms into ceremonies, and each rumble into a reminder that life is always lived within. Relationship between sky and earth, between gods and humans, between sound and silence. Chapter 12. Rain and the soul's journey in the Maya imagination. Rain was never only about the nourishment of fields. It was about the nourishment of the soul. Just as drops of water soaked into the earth and called forth maize from the soil, so too was the human spirit believed to be fed, guided and carried by the waters of the world. In this way, Chaac's presence was not limited to the realm of agriculture or daily survival. His reigns extended into the invisible landscapes of existence, the paths a soul might walk after death, the bridges between one life and the next. The Maya held a view of existence that was cyclical, much like the cycles of rainfall and drought. Life and death were not sharp divisions, but movements in an endless turning wheel. Just as water evaporates from the surface of the earth, rises into clouds, and falls again, so did the spirit journey between forms, worlds, and times. Rain, in this sense, became a metaphor for transformation. Every droplet was part of a larger cycle that returned again and again. And the soul, too, was part of that eternal return. Funerary beliefs reflected this intertwining of water and spirit. Burials often included vessels of water or imagery of flowing streams, as if to provide the deceased with guidance on their journey. In some regions, the dead were interred near caves or cenotes, places where the barrier between the human world and the watery underworld seemed thin. These locations carried a sacred resonance, for they were entrances into the realm of Xibalba, the Maya underworld, a place not of eternal punishment, but of trial, passage, and eventual renewal. Xibalba itself was imagined as a place of rivers, pools, and waters that tested the soul. The Popover, a sacred Chaac text, describes the hero twins navigating through dark rivers filled with obstacles, trials of endurance, and deceptive challenges. Water, in this context, was not simply a gift. It was a medium of initiation, a way of shaping, testing, and ultimately refining the soul. To pass through the waters of Xibalba was to prove resilience, courage, and the capacity to transform. Yet water was not only a trial, it was also a comfort. Many Maya communities believed the souls of the deceased, especially those who died by drowning, by lightning, or through illnesses linked to rain, were carried directly to Chaac's paradise. This was not a fearful belief, but a gentle assurance. Those claimed by water were taken under the rain god's protection, welcomed into a realm where life-giving waters never ceased to flow. In this way, rain was not only the sustenance of crops, but the promise of shelter beyond death. Ceremonies for the dead often included invocations to water. Libations might be poured onto the earth, droplets sprinkled over the body, or vessels left among grave goods. Each act carried the same message: may the soul be refreshed, may the path be softened, may the journey be eased by water's flowing presence. The symbolism extended into ritual speech, where rain was called the drink of the ancestors, the voice of guidance, the stream that connected the living and the departed. This imagery reveals something profound about Maya's spirituality, the idea that the elements themselves were companions to human destiny. Rain was not only falling from above, but falling within the human heart. It soaked not only soil, but memory, longing, and hope. Just as a community looked to the sky for Chaac showers, individuals looked inward, trusting that the same water guiding their maze would guide their spirit. There is a reflective quiet in this understanding. If rain is part of the soul's journey, then every shower, every storm, every mist carries a reminder of our own passage. To feel rain on the skin might be to feel the touch of renewal, a hint that the journey does not end at death but continues, like water itself, through cycles of change. To hear rain against the roof at night might be to sense the presence of those who have gone before, whispering softly in the language of droplets and streams. Philosophically, this intertwining of water and spirit suggests that life itself was never viewed in isolation. The Maya saw themselves as bound to the elements, participants in a cosmos where nothing stood apart. Rain did not merely serve them. It shaped them, defined them, and carried them across thresholds both visible and invisible. To honor Chaac was therefore not only to pray for maize and sustenance, it was to recognize water as the essence of being, the bridge between birth, death, and the return of life. The cenotes once again take on meaning in this light. As entrances to watery depths, they were also entrances to the mystery of death and beyond. To stand at the edge of such a pool, looking into the dark water, was to contemplate the unknown. And yet in Maya thought, the unknown was never final. Just as water always returns, so too did the soul. Perhaps this is why offerings cast into those depths carried both gratitude and trust. Gratitude for life sustained, and trust in a journey that continued through the hidden waters below. Even today, the connection lingers. Rain remains a symbol of blessing, of cleansing, of renewal. Across cultures, it has been linked to tears, to rebirth, to cycles that remind us we are never alone in our passage. For the Maya, this connection was vivid, alive, inseparable from daily life. To see the first rains of the season was to know not only that the maize would grow, but that the soul itself was moving in harmony with the eternal in this way. The Maya vision of rain and the soul is not only history but an invitation. It asks us to reflect on how we, too, understand our journey. Do we see life as a straight line or as a cycle, flowing like water, ever returning? Do we notice the rain not only as weather but as a reminder that everything we are is carried by forces greater than ourselves? and that death, like drought, is only one phase in the rhythm of renewal. Perhaps the Maya answer was simple and profound. To live is to flow. To die is to flow differently. And in every drop of rain, Chaac reminds the soul that its journey, like the water cycle itself, is without end. Chapter 13. The Cenote of Sacred Sleep. At the heart of the Yucatan, beneath the heavy sky and the endless green of the lowland forests, there lies a pool that once drew kings, priests, and pilgrims alike. The sacred cenote of Chichen Itza is not merely a natural sinkhole. It is a place where water meets silence, and where silence was once filled with prayers that carried both hope and surrender. To the ancient Maya, it was not only a well of life, it was a threshold, a surface that reflected the sky while hinting at a world below. The cenotes waters descend almost 20 meters from the lip of the stone rim. For those who approached in antiquity, it was like standing at the edge of the earth, peering into a darkness that both invited and unsettled. The Maya called such places Jonot, meaning wells, yet their significance was far greater than the simple act of quenching thirst. These pools were the veins of the underworld, portals to where gods received gifts and where human destinies were carried beyond mortal sight. Archaeological studies of the sacred cenote have revealed objects resting at its bottom: jade beads, golden ornaments, copper bells, and carved effigies. Alongside them, the bones of men, women, and children. These discoveries confirm what early Spanish chroniclers recorded with uneasy fascination, that offerings, both precious objects and human lives, were given to the waters. But to frame them merely as sacrifices risks missing the essence of what was unfolding at the cenote. For the Maya, each gift was not an ending, but an act of entrustment. Water, in their cosmology, was not passive. It listened. It received. It carried. When gold sank into the cenote, it was not lost. It was delivered. When human lives were surrendered, they were not extinguished. They were handed into the embrace of the rain god, Chaac, whose domain extended not only to crops and clouds, but to the very mysteries of the afterlife. Standing at the rim of the sacred cenote, one can imagine the ceremonies that once filled the clearing, the air thick with incense smoke, rising in spirals that echoed the descent into the pool below, the sound of drums and conch shells, prayers recited, not as individual voices, but as the collective breath of a community dependent on the sky's favor. And then the silence that follows release. The rippling surface slowly smoothing, as if the water itself were absorbing the words, the fears, the gratitude of those above. There is a paradox here. The cenote was both feared and revered. To approach its edge was to draw near to a force beyond comprehension. Yet the Maya did not see fear as contradiction. To fear the waters was to acknowledge their power. And to give in to that power was to align with the great cycle that bound rain, maize, life, and death into one continuous rhythm. Modern divers who have descended into the cenote speak of its stillness. Beneath the surface, there is no current, no rush of water, only the suspended silence of centuries, broken occasionally by the gleam of an artifact resting in silt. This stillness, this suspension, may help us understand why the Maya conceived of the cenote as a place of sleep. Not a restless sleep, but a sacred one. A sleep that does not end, but transforms. To call it the cenote of sacred sleep is to capture something of the atmosphere that must have permeated its rituals. Sleep is surrender. It is a release of control, a trust in forces larger than ourselves. For the Maya, casting offerings into the water was not simply a plea for rain. It was a symbolic act of resting in the hands of the divine, allowing both lives and treasures to dissolve into the still embrace of eternity. Reflect for a moment on the role of water in sleep. The sound of rain calms. The rhythm of waves soothes. Even today, many find rest only when accompanied by the quiet voice of water. For the Maya, this connection was magnified. To be laid in the cenote was to enter a sleep that mirrored the very cycles of the cosmos. Just as the sun sets and rises, just as the rains withdraw and return, so the soul, too, lay down in the water's silence, awaiting renewal. Yet renewal was not guaranteed. The cenote was not a gentle symbol alone. It was also a place of testing. In Maya mythology, the underworld was filled with trials, rivers of blood and bone, houses of darkness and fire. To be given to the cenote was to step into that unknown. It was trust, but also risk. This tension between fear and faith, dread and devotion, is what made the cenote sacred. Archaeologists note that many of the human remains recovered from the sacred cenote belonged to the young. Children, in particular, were offered, perhaps because their innocence was thought to appeal most strongly to Chaac. This fact, stark as it is, reminds us that the cenote was not an abstract metaphor but a living practice, born of desperation and hope. Drought could mean ruin. Famine could mean death for thousands. In such moments, the greatest offering was demanded life itself, entrusted to the deep water in the hope that the rains would return. To modern eyes, this may seem cruel, but within Maya belief, those given to the cenote were not abandoned. They were believed to continue in the world of Chaac, companions of the rain, intermediaries who could plead for the community from beyond. In this way, the cenote was both a grave and a promise. Imagine standing there at twilight, when the forest quiets and the cicadas hum in unison. The surface of the cenote darkens, reflecting the fading light of the sky. The air is heavy with moisture, the scent of earth and limestone thick around you. One can sense why the Maya felt that here, the worlds touched. That here, the voice of humanity could reach the gods, and the voice of the gods might ripple back. The cenote remains today, its waters green and still. Visitors peer over the stone rim, photographing what once was feared and revered. But if one looks long enough, past the touristic bustle, past the explanations carved on signs, one may catch a glimpse of the old silence. That pause in the air where time folds, and the surface of the cenote seems to hold not only water but memory itself. The sacred cenote was not about death alone. It was about surrender. It was about acknowledging limits, entrusting what one could not control into the hands of powers greater than oneself. In that act, there was both fear and relief. And in that act, perhaps, lies a lesson still resonant, that some aspects of life can only be entrusted, never mastered. Even now, when rain falls over Chichen Itza, droplets must find their way into the limestone, filtering through cracks until they join the waters of the cenote. Each drop carries a story, each drop a continuation of the cycle, and perhaps, in that flow, we hear an echo of the countless prayers once whispered at its edge. The cenote of sacred sleep reminds us that water is not only for the body, it is for the spirit. It can be a mirror, a veil, a bridge, and it leaves us with a question that lingers softly. When our own time comes to release control, will we, too, be ready to rest in the stillness, to surrender into the water's embrace? Chapter 14. Chaac in the cycles of time. The Maya did not imagine time as a straight line. To them, it was a circle, a great wheel turning endlessly, where beginnings and endings folded into one another. This sense of cyclical time guided their calendars, their rituals, and their view of life itself. And within these turning cycles, one presence was constant: Chaac, the bringer of rain. His rhythms were inscribed not only in the sky and the soil, but also in the careful mathematics of the Maya calendar. The calendar was more than a tool of record-keeping. It was a sacred instrument, a way to understand the relationship between the heavens, the earth, and human existence. The Maya tracked days with precision, aligning human action with cosmic order. The rising of Venus, the movement of the sun, the changing of the moon, all were woven into a system of astonishing complexity and beauty. And within this system, the cycles of rain and drought, sowing and harvest, were given shape. The Hob, the solar calendar of 365 days, divided the year into 18 months of 20 days, with 5 extra days at the end. These were not simply months as we might think of them today. Each had its own name, its own spirit, its own association with the cycles of work and ritual. Some months were linked with planting, others with harvest. Some carried omens of fertility, others of transition. In the months tied to agriculture, Chaac's presence was felt most strongly. To plant maize without prayer to the rain god would have been unthinkable. Alongside the Hob ran the Tzolk'in, the 260-day sacred calendar. This cycle was not based on the sun, but on the rhythms of life itself, the length of human gestation, the span between planting and harvest, the pulse of ritual observance. Each day carried a name and a number, creating combinations that repeated in a pattern of deep significance. Priests read these patterns like voices from the divine, discerning when to hold ceremonies, when to ask for rain, when to offer thanks. Chaac's influence was especially present in the moments of transition, the turning of the seasons, the times when clouds gathered or withdrew. For the Maya, these shifts were not accidents of weather, but signals within the great design. The coming of the rains was not simply meteorology, it was alignment. It was the gods moving once more in harmony with the needs of the people. Consider how the agricultural cycle itself formed a mirror of human existence. Seeds buried in darkness, pushing upward with the rains. Growth, maturity, harvest, and finally return to the soil. Chaac was not merely a god of weather, but a keeper of this eternal rhythm. When the rains fell, life advanced along its proper path. When they failed, the cycle faltered. In this way, time itself seemed to flow with water, pulsing through the earth and the heavens with every storm. The Maya also observed larger cycles, Bactans, great spans of time reaching across centuries. Within these cycles, the actions of kings and the fates of cities were set against the backdrop of divine order. In inscriptions carved on stelae and temple walls, Chaac appears in scenes tied to these cycles, invoked in moments of renewal or commemoration. His image reminded those who watched the passage of time that rains do not belong only to the present. They are eternal, reappearing in each great turn of the wheel. Chapter 15. Rain across the Maya cities. Across the wide stretch of Maya lands, cities rose like green islands in the rainforest, each one a center of culture, power, and devotion. From the monumental temples of Tikal to the intricate palaces of Uzmal, from the sacred waters of Chichen Itza to the plazas of Copan, each city was shaped by its own traditions. Yet beneath these differences, A shared reverence bound them together. The devotion to Chaac, the bringer of rain. The Maya world was not a single empire, but a tapestry of city-states, each ruled by its own dynasty, each engaged in alliances, rivalries, and exchanges. Their economies and their very survival depended on water. The forests were dense, but rivers were scarce in much of the lowlands. Rain was not only nourishment for crops, but the lifeline of entire communities. And so, in city after city, rituals to Chaac became central to civic and spiritual life. In Tikal, one of the largest and most enduring Maya cities, towering pyramids rose above the jungle canopy. Here rulers were not only political leaders, but mediators with the divine. Inscriptions and stelae describe ceremonies tied to agricultural cycles, where kings invoked Chaac's blessing for rain. The architecture itself reflected this devotion. Reservoirs, carefully engineered, caught and stored rainwater, making the city habitable for tens of thousands. These vast systems were not only practical but sacred, a reminder that the city's very stones depended on Chaac's generosity. Further north, in the Puuk region, the city of Uzmal reveals another face of Chaac's worship. Here, the facades of temples are adorned with countless stone masks of the rain god. Long noses curled downward like streams of water, repeating across entire walls in rhythmic patterns. The sheer abundance of Chaac imagery at Uzmal suggests a deep regional emphasis on rainfall, likely tied to the area's lack of natural rivers or lakes. Every drop mattered, and every stone face was a prayer turned to the sky. When one walks among these ruins today, the repetition feels almost like a chant carved into stone, a chorus of rain gods watching, waiting, remembering. At Chichen Itza, the sacred cenote stands as a testament to devotion. Offerings of jade, gold, pottery, and even human lives were given to the waters, seeking Chaac's favor. This practice was not a simple transaction, but a recognition of the cenote as a portal, a place where the surface world touched the underworld, where human voices could reach divine ears. The rains that fed the cenote were seen as Chaac's direct gift, and so the city offered its most precious treasures in return. Further south, near the edge of the Maya world, brought its own expressions of reverence. Here, intricate stone carvings depict rulers performing rituals, often linked with celestial cycles and agricultural rites. Though Copanese inscriptions emphasize dynastic history, the underlying theme remains the same. The well-being of the people was tied to the well-being of the maize, and the maize to the rains. The kings were judged not only by their political skill, but by their ability to maintain balance with the gods, especially Chaac. Across these cities, the diversity of ritual is striking. Some called upon Chaac through dances and music, where gourd rattles imitated falling rain and drums echoed distant thunder. Others turned to offerings at cenotes, caves, and mountain shrines, believing that Chaac dwelled beneath the surface as much as above the clouds. In some places, effigies of frogs were used, since their calls were a natural sign that rains were near. In others, serpents were central, reflecting the lightning and storms that accompanied rainfall. Yet while each city expressed its devotion in unique forms, the unity of belief remains clear. To be Maya was to live in rhythm with water, to see Chaac not as a distant god but as an intimate presence, woven into every field, every harvest, every season. Even warfare and politics were influenced by this devotion. Victories were celebrated with rain ceremonies, while droughts could weaken a ruler's authority, casting doubt on his connection to the divine. Archaeologists have traced patterns of drought across the Maya world. And in these moments, the intensity of Chaac's worship often seems to rise. Greater offerings, larger ceremonies, and sometimes even acts of desperation mark the archaeological record. The fragility of rainfall meant that faith in Chaac was both a source of comfort and a reminder of human dependence. When rains came, cities flourished. When they did not, even the mightiest cities faltered. Still, within this fragility lies a remarkable resilience. The devotion to Chaac united regions that otherwise might have remained divided. A traveler moving from Tikal to Uzmal, or from Chichen Itza to Copan, would hear different accents, see different art, and encounter different customs. But in each place, the same prayers for rain would rise, the same gestures of reverence would be made. Chaac was the thread that bound the fabric of the Maya world. There is something deeply human in this unity. Across vast distances, through centuries of change, communities turned their faces upward in hope for the same gift, rain. The gods may have been depicted differently in stone. The rituals may have varied in rhythm and detail, but the longing was the same. It is a reminder that beneath all cultural diversity lies a shared need, a shared recognition of life's fragile dependence on forces beyond control. One can imagine the stillness before a ceremony, a plaza filled with people, the air heavy with heat, the sky dry and pale. Drums begin to sound, rattles shake, incense rises in smoke. A priest lifts his voice, calling to Chaac, and the people respond with silence, with hope, with surrender. Moments like these must have repeated across countless Maya cities, across countless seasons, creating a rhythm as steady as the rains themselves. And perhaps, when thunder rolled across the sky, it was heard not only as sound, but as an answer, Chaac's voice echoing through the valleys, across the plazas, into the hearts of those who waited. In reflecting on how rain was honored across the Maya cities, one is left with a quiet realization. Water was not just sustenance, but connection. It tied humans to the earth, cities to one another, the present to the eternal. Chaac's presence, though expressed in countless ways, carried the same truth, that life depends on the gifts that fall from the sky. And so a gentle question lingers. If rain was the thread that bound the Maya world together, what invisible threads bind us now across distances, across cultures, across time in our own shared longing for what sustains life? One of the most striking ways Chaac was woven into cyclical time was through the rituals that aligned with seasonal shifts. The onset of the rainy season, usually in late spring, was marked with ceremonies in his honor. Priests carried offerings to cenotes, or called upon Chaac through prayers, dances, and the scattering of maize. These rituals were not merely requests for favorable weather. They were acknowledgments of the great cycle itself, a recognition that humanity must continually re-enter the rhythm of the cosmos, never taking water for granted. Even today, the echoes of these cycles remain. In villages across the Yucatan, Chaac ceremonies are still performed, where offerings of food, incense, and prayers are given for rain. The continuity of these rituals, across centuries of change, speaks to how deeply the cycles of time and the presence of Chaac are intertwined. The ancient calendars may no longer guide daily life, but the rhythm of rain and growth still anchors the year, reminding communities that time is not only measured in numbers, but in the return of essential gifts. There is something profoundly calming in this cyclical view of time. Unlike the modern notion of progress as a line stretching endlessly forward, the Maya vision carries with it a sense of return. Every drought will end. Every dry seed will once again meet the rain. Chaac's thunder may vanish into silence, but it will resound again in another season. To live within cycles is to live with trust. Trust that what departs will return. Trust that the turning of time is not an ending but a renewal. And yet cycles are not without their uncertainties. The Maya knew well the anxiety of waiting for rains that delayed, for skies that remained clear too long. In those stretches of stillness, the cycle felt fragile. Would Chaac answer? Would the great rhythm continue? These questions shaped not only their agriculture, but their spirituality. For, in cycles, as in life, renewal is promised but not always predictable. The Maya calendar was a language of time, and Chaac was one of its most constant words. To read the turning of days was to hear the approach of rain, the call of thunder, the whisper of clouds gathering at the horizon. Each calendar cycle was a reminder that water and time move together, flowing, receding, and returning. Picture the slow unfolding of a Maya year. The dry months, with fields cracked and waiting. The prayers rising as clouds first appear, heavy and grey. The first rains falling, soaking the earth, filling the air with the scent of renewal. Then the months of green, when maize rose high, nourished by the sky. And at last, harvest gratitude, celebration, and acknowledgement that the cycle would soon begin again. This was the rhythm into which Chaac was woven, a rhythm not of chance, but of divine order. Chapter 16. The Serpent and the Sky. In Maya belief, the serpent was not only a creature of the earth, it was a bridge. Its body could curl and coil along the ground, yet its spirit was imagined to rise into the heavens, transforming into clouds, storms, and the very breath of rain. Chaac, the great bringer of water, was often bound to this image. His lightning axe cracked open the sky, and from the wounds came serpents of rain. Twisting down toward the thirsty earth, archaeologists have uncovered countless carvings across the Maya world where serpents are etched alongside Chaac. At Uxmal, the famed governor's palace carries stone masks of the rain god, his hooked nose extending outward, and from his open mouth emerges the undulating body of a serpent. At Chichen Itza, serpent imagery dominates, most famously in the Great Pyramid of Kukulkan, where the shadow of a serpent descends the staircase at the equinox. Though Kukulkan and Chaac were not the same deity, their connection through rain, sky, and renewal makes the serpent a shared, living motif. For the Maya, serpents were vessels. Their scaled bodies mirrored the flow of rivers. Their movement was the twisting path of clouds across the sky. And in ritual imagination, a serpent could carry water between worlds, linking the celestial with the earthly, the divine with the human. The role of serpents as carriers of rain can also be found in their myths. Some stories speak of sky serpents, whose scales shimmer like droplets, whose mouths release storms. Others describe Chaac hurling lightning bolts that strike the ground in the form of writhing serpents. In this way, the strike of lightning and the fall of rain became one movement, one gesture of divine communication. The Maya were not alone in this vision. Across Mesoamerica, serpents symbolized the sky's fertility. Among the Aztec, the god Tlaloc shared traits with Chaac, and his lightning and rain were likewise linked to serpentine energy. The feathered serpent, known as Quetzalcoatl to the Aztec and Kukulkan to the Maya, carried its own associations with wind, rain, and renewal. Yet in Maya thought, Chaac was less about ruling from a throne in the sky, and more about active presence. His serpents were not abstract symbols, but living forces that people believed descended into their fields, their rivers, and their very homes. Consider for a moment the natural world the Maya observed. In the Yucatan's forests, serpents are common, their movements sudden yet fluid. In the heat of the rainy season, storms curl across the sky in shapes that resemble coiling bodies. Lightning forks, rainfalls, and thunder echoes like the hiss of a serpent. These parallels made the link between Chaac and serpents not only mystical, but deeply observational. The natural environment itself seemed to whisper the truth of this connection. In ritual practice, the serpent's role was honored through imagery and offerings. Masks, vessels, and murals depict serpents with droplets falling from their mouths. Some carry tiny human figures within them, suggesting passage between worlds. Others show serpents sprouting feathers, wings, or clouds, transforming them into celestial beings. In ceremonies dedicated to Chaac, the rattling of instruments may have imitated the serpent's sound, calling down the rains just as the serpent itself was believed to summon storms. The serpent was also a symbol of renewal. Just as it shed its skin, revealing a new body beneath, the land shed its dry season with the coming of rain. The fields, once parched and cracked, softened, darkened, and came alive again for the Maya. This shedding was a sacred rhythm, a reminder that endings and beginnings are not separate, but parts of one eternal cycle. Chaac, through his serpents, embodied that promise of renewal. In some steely serpents are carved with open jaws, and within those jaws, entire worlds seem to appear human figures, gods, even temples. This imagery spoke to the serpent as a passage, a living portal. Rain was not only water falling from above, it was a messenger, a carrier of spirit and vitality, moving through the serpent's body to reach the earth. To look upon the sky and see serpentine clouds was to see Chaac's promise unfolding. There is a quiet wonder in how the Maya read the heavens. Where others might see only storm clouds, they saw scaled bodies twisting and hissing across the sky. Where others might hear only thunder, they heard the voice of Chaac calling. In this way, every storm became a sacred encounter. And so the serpent lived at the heart of Maya imagination. Not only feared as a creature of venom and stealth, but revered as the carrier of life's most essential gift, water. The serpent and the sky were joined, inseparable in the Maya mind. Chaac did not simply rule the storms. He moved within them, his presence alive in the writhing serpent of rain. One might pause here and wonder, did the Maya see a single serpent stretched across the heavens, coiling endlessly in cycles of storm and calm? Or did they imagine countless serpents, each rain shower a new body, each lightning bolt a fresh descent of Chaac's power? Perhaps it was both. Perhaps the serpent was at once infinite and immediate, a cosmic force and a passing storm. The serpent, after all, is both grounded and celestial. It slithers in the dust, yet it carries the rain. It hides in silence, then appears with sudden force. It sheds its skin, yet never dies. It was this duality that gave it power in Maya belief, and made it the perfect companion for Chaac, Lord of Rain, giver of renewal. And so the serpent remains, carved in stone, painted in murals, whispered in myths, a creature of earth, of sky, and of something beyond both. When the rains fall and the clouds coil across the horizon, one may still feel the echo of that ancient vision, the serpent, the sky, and Chaac, moving together in the eternal rhythm of water and life. For in every storm lies a question. Do we only see clouds and lightning, or do we glimpse the serpent that carries the rain? The Maya chose to glimpse more. In their eyes, The serpent was never only an animal, it was a vessel of meaning. To see a serpent slithering through the undergrowth was to see the same energy that curved across the heavens. The scales glinting in the sunlight were not so different from the silver flashes of rain in the air. Each form carried the same essence, shifting only in shape. Even in silence, the serpent was present. Coiled motifs wound their way around temple. Staircases etched into doorways and traced onto ceramic vessels. The people who touched those carvings might have believed they touched a fragment of the living sky. To them, stone was not lifeless, it held memory, and memory held power. The serpent was not merely represented in stone. It was believed to inhabit it. And when storms rose suddenly, cracking the heavens open with thunder, it was not only Chaac's voice they heard. It was also the movement of the sky serpent, writhing and twisting across the horizon. To see lightning split the darkness was to see the serpent's tongue flicker, brief, dangerous, alive. What remains most striking is how tenderly the Maya seemed to hold this dual image of danger and blessing. The serpent was feared, but it was also welcomed. It was never pushed into a single role, never forced into the limits of good or evil. Instead, it was accepted as both a mirror of rain itself. Sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, yet always necessary. Perhaps this is why the serpent, sky, and Chaac remain inseparable in memory. One does not exist without the others. Together, they form a triad of survival, of renewal, of awe. And even now, when rain falls against a window or lightning streaks across a quiet night, the old imagery feels close. It lingers, as if waiting for us to notice, to remember that water, sky, and serpent have always been part of the same eternal story. And maybe the true mystery is not whether the Maya were right or wrong in their vision. It is whether we, in our modern certainty, have lost something they held so naturally, the ability to look at a storm and see not only weather, but meaning. Chapter 17. Echoes of Drought and Prayer. The Maya lived in a land both lush and fragile. Their forests were thick with life, but beneath the canopy the soil was thin, and the rains were never guaranteed. Water was everything. When it came, rivers swelled, maize grew tall, and villages thrived. When it failed, the earth cracked open, and hunger pressed hard against the people. It was in those long dry months that devotion to Chaac deepened most. Drought was not understood only as a natural misfortune, it was also a silence, a pause in the gods' generosity. To live through such silence was to be reminded of dependence. Every kernel of maize, every drop of water came from the same unseen source. And so, in times of scarcity, the prayers grew louder, the offerings more frequent, the rituals more urgent. Archaeologists at sites like Uzmal and Tikal have uncovered evidence of such intensified devotion. Inscriptions describe years when rains failed, and in response, entire communities gathered at the great temples. Priests raised their voices, calling for Chaac's compassion. Maize, honey, incense, and even jade were cast into the flames or poured into sacred waters, each offering a small act of trust. Some accounts suggest that children, too, were offered innocence returned to the God who gave life, in the hope that he would return it again as rain. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza tells this story most vividly. Within its depths, divers have recovered not only the bones of humans, but also golden bells, carved jade, obsidian blades, and fragments of pottery. These were not thrown away carelessly. They were gifts entrusted to the eternal waters when the sky above had closed itself. In such gestures, the people placed their desperation but also their hope. For even in drought, the cenote held water, and that water seemed to whisper of promise, of life hidden just beyond reach. What is striking, however, is that the Maya did not frame drought only in terms of punishment. Unlike many cultures where famine was seen as divine wrath, the Maya often approached it as a cyclotesting of endurance within the greater rhythm of time. The calendar itself reflected this view, weaving seasons of rain and dryness into its careful order. To face drought was to face a chapter in the ongoing story of existence, not the end of it. Still, the human cost was heavy. Crops shriveled, storage ran thin, and families waited with uncertainty. Oral traditions suggest that communities would gather to dance together, not in despair, but in unity. The sound of rattles and drums carried prayers upward, as if the rhythm itself might awaken Chaac's attention. It was not only the priests who prayed, but everyone, farmers, children, elders, all bound together in the same fragile dependence on the sky. One might ask, what did those prayers feel like in the stillness of a cloudless horizon? When day after day the sun blazed without relief, when the air shimmered with heat, when the fields cracked it, the prayers sound different. Were they spoken softly, like whispers to a friend, or shouted with the urgency of survival? Perhaps both. Perhaps the Maya, like many across history, discovered that in scarcity, prayer carries a sharper edge, yet also a deeper tenderness. From a modern perspective, drought is measured in rainfall charts, in degrees of temperature, in months without water. But for the Maya, it was experienced in the most human of ways, in hunger, in thirst, in the eyes of children waiting for a meal. It was a spiritual weight, but one that did not break their devotion. If anything, it carved it deeper. At times, drought reshaped entire societies. Scholars believe that prolonged dry periods contributed to the decline of great cities, pressing populations to move, abandon, or change their ways of life. Yet even in collapse, Chaac's presence remained. Ruins still bear his image. Temples still rise with his symbols carved into their walls. Drought may have ended kingdoms, but it did not end faith. Perhaps this is where the Maya worldview offers a quiet lesson. They did not see themselves as masters of nature, but as partners within its cycles. When rain failed, they did not curse the sky alone. They also looked inward, adjusting rituals, renewing promises, and reminding themselves that survival depended on harmony. Prayer was not only a plea for rain, but a way of keeping that harmony alive. And so, in the echo of drought, one finds more than desperation, one finds resilience. The Maya prayed not simply because they feared losing life, but because they believed. Life was always connected to the sky, to the rain, to Chaac. Even emptiness, even silence, was part of that connection. Today, when dry seasons spread across lands once fertile, and rivers retreat from their banks, one might recall those ancient voices that did not separate prayer from survival or ritual from resilience. In every drought, they found reason to come together, reason to remember dependence, reason to hope, and perhaps that is the lingering mystery. Is prayer in times of scarcity only a cry for help? Or is it, more quietly, a way of affirming that, even in emptiness, we are still part of something larger, still bound to the cycles of sky and soil, still listening for the return of rain? Inscriptions and stelae from the classic Maya period provide hints of just how central drought could be in shaping both ritual and politics. At Köpen, at Karakul, and at smaller city-states, rulers marked their reigns not only with battles or alliances, but also with references to rain. To be a good king was, in part, to be able to secure the blessings of Chaac. If the rains came, the ruler's legitimacy was affirmed. If they failed, questions of favor and balance arose. The heavens were not separate from the throne. They were woven into the fabric of governance itself. The droughts that stretched over decades left more than dry soil. They left patterns of migration, shifts in agriculture, and new centers of ritual activity. Some archaeologists have traced the rise of pilgrimage sites during these periods, places where people would journey great distances to leave offerings at caves, cenotes, and temples. The act of walking itself became part of the prayer, each step a testament to endurance, each offering a small thread of trust spun into the silence of the sky. It is telling that so many offerings during droughts were made of objects connected to fertility and renewal, jade beads symbolizing life's essence, shells evoking water, and maize kernels embodying sustenance. These gifts were more than tokens. They were a way of mirroring what was being asked for. To offer maize was to return the cycle to its beginning, to remind Chaac of the gift already given, and to invite its renewal. Chapter 18. Chaac in daily life. In the vast expanse of Maya lands, from the dense forests of the lowlands to the rolling hills of the highlands, life was never far from Chaac's presence. His name may not have been spoken in every moment, but his spirit was felt in the rhythm of daily existence. For the Maya, Chaac was not confined to temple rituals or grand ceremonies. He was present in the humblest acts of planting seeds, watching the sky, and tending to maize. When the first rains of the season approached, families would prepare their fields with care. The planting of maize was not a mere task of agriculture, was a dialogue with the divine. Men and women alike pressed kernels into the soil, pausing with reverence, aware that the ground beneath their feet was more than dirt. It was the womb of the earth, waiting to be awakened by water. With each seed came a hope, a prayer unspoken yet deeply felt, that Chaac would bring the rains in their right time. Neither too early nor too late, children grew up learning to watch the clouds, the shape of the horizon at dusk, the way the air grew heavy before a storm. These were not simply signs of weather, but lessons in reading Chaac's hand upon the sky. Grandparents taught them how to listen to the distant rumble of thunder, not as a noise to fear, but as a voice to heed. Chaac is speaking, they would say, and the young learned that even in the sound of the storm there was reassurance, a promise that life would be sustained. Everyday offerings reflected this intimacy. A woman might leave a few kernels of maize at the edge of her hearth before grinding the rest into meal. A farmer might pour the first sip of his drink onto the soil before tasting it himself. These were not elaborate gestures, but quiet acknowledgments that all nourishment flowed first through Chaac's gift of rain. To eat, to drink, to live, was to partake in what had been made possible by his hand. Even the rhythm of work itself mirrored devotion. Farmers rose at dawn, their bodies moving in harmony with the cycles of light and moisture. As they tilled, planted, and weeded, they worked not only for survival, but in recognition of a covenant. That human effort and divine blessing were threads of the same fabric. Without human care, the field could not flourish. Without Chaac's rains, all effort was in vain. In markets, where goods were traded and voices mingled, Chaac's influence was present too. Maize, beans, squash, and cacao, every staple that passed between hands carried the imprint of rain. To exchange food was, in a sense, to exchange the blessings of Chaac. Markets were not just centers of commerce, but living reminders that community itself depended on the steady balance of water and earth at the household level. Water storage was an act of quiet faith. Vessels of clay were carefully shaped, not only for utility but also for symbolism. Some were decorated with serpents or with eyes shaped like raindrops, reminders of the divine origin of what they contained. Each time water was poured from these jars, it was more than a physical act. It was a renewal of gratitude, a silent nod to the unseen power that had filled them. In times when the rains were steady, Chaac's presence was gentle, almost unnoticed in its constancy. Yet in years when clouds withheld their gifts, his absence was felt as a deep ache. Families adjusted their meals, stretching what they had, and prayers became more frequent, more tender. But even then, the Maya did not view drought as abandonment or punishment. Instead, it was seen as part of the delicate dance between humans and the divine. Waiting for rain became itself a form of devotion, a season of patience that tested faith and resilience. What is striking is how seamlessly devotion blended into daily labor. There was no sharp line dividing the sacred and the ordinary. To prepare food, to store water, to teach a child about the patterns of the sky, each was an act of reverence in its own way. Chaac was not distant. He was woven into the fabric of existence, as close as the soil under one's fingernails, as near as the droplets that clung to leaves in the morning light. One can imagine a quiet evening in a Maya village. The day's work is done, and families sit together near their homes. The air grows cooler as the sun slips behind the horizon. In the distance, a cloud drifts slowly, catching the last hues of red and gold. Someone notices a faint rumble, and all pause for a moment. The sound is low, steady, familiar. It is thunder. And in that instant, even without words, they understand. Chaac is near. The fields will drink again, and with them, life will continue. Such moments remind us of how deeply spirituality can be embedded in the ordinary. The Maya did not need constant grandeur to feel the presence of the divine. For them, every drop of water was a gift, every harvest a blessing, and every storm a conversation. And so the question remains, as it drifts gently through time, do we still notice the sacred in our daily lives, as the Maya once did in theirs? When the rain falls upon our roofs, do we hear only the weather roar? Can we still sense, if only faintly, the echo of Chaac in its rhythm? The Maya world teaches us that the sacred was never far away. It did not require temples of stone to make its presence known, though those existed in majesty. It was carried in the sound of rainfall striking leaves, in the scent of wet earth, in the glisten of droplets on a stalk of maize. The divine lived in proximity, not distance, and perhaps that is why Chaac was so enduring. His presence was not locked within priestly rituals, nor confined to the great cities. He belonged just as much to the farmer kneeling in the soil as he did to the kings who offered sacrifices on temple tops. This closeness created a rhythm that guided daily choices. Even the division of time when to plant, when to weed, when to gather was not decided only by human calendars, but by the movements of rain. Chaac became, in essence, the keeper of balance. His rains were not only water for the fields, but the very structure of the year. To live well was to live in harmony with that cycle. To live poorly was to ignore it. Yet devotion was not merely practical. There were emotional currents, too. For a mother, rain meant her children would not go hungry. For a craftsman, it meant the markets would be full and trade would flow. For an elder, the rains brought the reassurance that traditions would endure. For maize could once again be planted and carried forward to the next generation. Each drop carried not only nourishment, but continuity, the thread that tied past and future together. We sometimes imagine religion as something reserved for the dramatic, the sacrifices, the festivals, the solemn prayers of priests. But what is striking about Chaac's role is how often he appeared in silence. In a child's glance at the horizon, in the shared relief of neighbors when the first storm broke the heat, in the act of filling a jar with water and knowing that life had been sustained for one more day. These were small devotions, almost invisible, yet they formed the foundation of belief. Over time, this quiet reverence created resilience. The Maya lived in lands where drought could bring suffering, but they did not surrender to despair. They carried hope forward, one season at a time, trusting that Chaac would return as he always had. The rains might fail for a season, but the rhythm of cycles was larger than any single year. Patience was faith, and faith was survival. Perhaps that is what remains most compelling about this daily bond, the way the divine was not distant, but woven into the work of hands and the beating of hearts. Chaac was not only the god of rain, he was the god of presence, of reminder that every ordinary moment contained a trace of the extraordinary. And so, when we hear the first drops strike the ground after a long dryness, what do we notice? Only the weather and its practical relief. Or can we, as the Maya once did, feel in that sound an ancient echo of gratitude, a whisper that life is always renewed by forces beyond our control? Chapter 19. Songs to the Rain. The Maya world was never silent. Beyond the rustle of leaves, the hum of insects, and the crash of storms, there were voices. Voices rising in chants, whispered in prayer, carried in rhythm across the fields. For Chaac, the rainbringer, devotion was often expressed not in carved stone or in grand ceremony alone, but in the flow of sound. Words, sung aloud, became bridges between the human and the divine. Songs to the rain were more than music. They were acts of faith. They carried hope, gratitude, and plea. In a land where survival hinged on the arrival of water, the act of singing became a way of weaving human longing into the very fabric of nature. To sing to Chaac was not only to ask for rain, but to join the cycle of creation itself. These chants were simple, yet layered with meaning. Some were short calls, easy for children to remember, passed from mouth to mouth across generations. Others were elaborate, led by priests whose voices echoed through temple courtyards. Some carried the steady beat of drums, mimicking the rhythm of falling rain. Others were hushed and slow, like a whisper carried to the clouds. The diversity of these songs reflected the many ways in which the Maya encountered Chaac, sometimes in desperation, sometimes in gratitude, sometimes in awe. The Popol Vuh, the great mythic text of the Maya, does not preserve specific chants to Chaac, but it describes the centrality of maize, water, and the divine forces that brought them together. Archaeologists and anthropologists, piecing together fragments from later records and modern Maya traditions, suggest that invocations to the rain god often blended praise with direct, personal address. "Come, Chaac," the people would sing, "open the sky, let your waters fall." The words were not grand poetry, but heartfelt dialogue. They were functional, meant to move the heart of the god as much as they moved the spirit of the singer. One can imagine the sound of these songs carrying across the fields. Farmers, bent in labor, might pause to chant in unison, their voices rising like a living offering. Women grinding maize might sing quiet refrains, their rhythm tied to the turning of the stone. Children, playing in the dust, might repeat the words they had heard, giving them back to the air without full understanding but with innocence that carried its own power. Song was not bound by location. It could be offered at temple altars, where incense rose alongside voices, or beside the household hearth, where daily life unfolded. In both places, the act of calling Chaac into presence was the same. To sing was to remind oneself that life was never lived alone, but always with the company of unseen powers. Music also softened the severity of ritual. While the sacrifices to Chaac, sometimes of animals, sometimes of blood, carried weight and solemnity, the songs often carried gentleness. They could be sung at night, like lullabies to the god, soft prayers carried into the darkness. They could be sung in the early morning, before planting, as though greeting the day with both work and reverence. Through song, the relationship with Chaac took on intimacy. He was not only feared or demanded from, but invited, coaxed, and cherished. Scholars note that the Maya often saw the spoken word itself as powerful creative. Even words were not only symbols, they had weight. To speak was to bring something closer to being. To sing to Chaac, then, was not only to request rain, but to enact, in some small measure, the very process of calling rain into existence. The chant became a ritual in sound, a mirror of thunder, a human echo of the storm. Even today, echoes of these rain songs survive among Maya communities. Farmers still lift their voices to call the clouds, blending Catholic prayers with ancient rhythms, layering Spanish words with Maya cadences. Though centuries have passed, the act remains the same: to voice longing into the open air, trusting that Chaac still listens. This endurance points to something profound. Music outlives kingdoms. Cities may fall, temples may crumble, stone may erode, but the human voice carries forward. It is fragile and fleeting, yet it renews itself each time a mother sings, each time a worker hums. The Maya, without knowing it, built a form of worship that could never fully be erased, because it lived not in monuments but in memory, in repetition, in the gentle current of song. And in this, there is a reflection for us. What power lies in a song? When voices join together, are they only making sound, or are they shaping reality? When the Maya sang to the rain, were they simply hoping, or were they participating in the mystery of creation, adding human rhythm to the rhythm of storms? Perhaps every storm still carries those echoes. Perhaps every drop that strikes the ground is not only water, but the memory of chants once offered, of voices long vanished but still somehow present in the cycle of earth and sky. And so, the songs to Chaac continue, sometimes heard, sometimes only felt. They are reminders that devotion does not always need grand gestures. Sometimes it needs only a voice lifted into the air, trusting that someone nor something listens. For what is a prayer if not a song? And what is a song if not a bridge between longing and the unseen? Among the Maya, song was rarely left alone. It was accompanied by instruments that shaped its rhythm and gave it strength. Drums made from hollowed logs or stretched hides imitated the heartbeat of the earth, steady and grounding. Rattles, filled with seeds or pebbles, echoed the patter of rain upon the leaves. Wooden flutes carried airy notes, light and piercing, as though calling down the wind itself. Together, they created a soundscape that did not seek entertainment, but transformation. In their cadence, the human world and the divine could meet. Archaeological evidence from murals and carvings shows how important music was in ritual life. In Bonampak, a series of murals depicts musicians and singers lined in procession. their presence as vital as that of warriors or priests. They remind us that the act of making sound was considered essential in reaching the gods. Silence had its place, but song could pierce the barrier between heaven and earth. The chants to Chaac were often seasonal. During planting, the tone might be one of anticipation, calling for the rains to begin. At harvest, the mood shifted toward gratitude, songs of thanks for what had been given. And in times of drought, the songs carried an urgency, voices rising higher, sharper, more insistent. One can imagine the collective swell of voices in such times, whole communities gathering to raise their sound toward the sky, not in despair, but in hope. For in the Maya view, hope itself was a sacred act, and song was its vessel. Some traditions describe the practice of antiphonal singing, where one group would sing a line and another would respond. The call and answer mirrored the natural world, the thunder calling, the earth replying, the rain falling, the crops rising. In this rhythm, humans enacted the very dialogue between sky and soil. The act of singing became a rehearsal of creation's balance, reminding all who joined that they were participants in a cosmic conversation. It is worth noting that many of these chants were never written down. They lived only in the breath of the singer, in the memory of the listener. That was their strength. Words etched in stone may break, manuscripts may burn, but words carried in song are reborn each time they are sung. They resist finality. They live in the body, in the lungs, in the vibration of sound itself. This fragility may have been intentional. To sing is to risk forgetting, yet it is also to trust in renewal. Each generation learned anew. Each voice carried the song forward. In this, the Maya mirrored the very rain they sought. Each drop disappears, yet the rain always returns. Modern ethnographies, who have recorded rain chants among Maya-speaking groups in Chiapas and the Yucatan, note how often they blend reverence with intimacy. Chaac is praised as powerful, yet also spoken to as though near, present, even listening like a neighbor. The boundary between awe and closeness dissolves in song. The god of storms becomes, for a moment, a companion who can be coaxed or comforted through melody, and so, these songs remind us that religion is not only carved in stone or written in sacred texts. It is also lived in sound. The Maya did not only build temples of limestone, they built temples of breath. With every chant, they raised pillars of sound into the air, trusting that Chaac would hear. One wonders, then, when the rains came, did the people believe their songs had worked? Or did they see the act of singing itself as the gift, the bridge that kept them close to the divine regardless of outcome? The truth may lie in both. For the Maya, cause and effect were not as separated as in modern thought. A song could help call rain, but it also carried its own spiritual weight. It was both prayer and offering, both request and devotion. To sing was already to be in the presence of Chaac. Even today, if one stands in the Maya lowlands as a storm gathers, it is possible to imagine the echo of those voices rising and falling like the wind, pulsing like the drum of thunder, shimmering like rain itself. The songs may no longer be heard, but they live in the rhythm of storms, in the breath of clouds, in the renewal of life. And so, the tradition lingers, fragile yet enduring, like rain. For though the words may fade, the longing they carried remains as old as humanity itself, the desire to reach beyond, to give voice to hope, and to trust that someone, somewhere, is listening. Perhaps that is the true song of the rain. Not only the chants of the Maya, but the universal human impulse to turn longing into melody, to pour gratitude into sound, to lift one's voice into the great, listening silence of the sky. Chapter 20. The disappearance of the old rain god. When the Spaniards arrived in the lands of the Maya, they did not only bring soldiers, ships, and steel. They carried with them another kind of power in unyielding faith, dressed in crosses and cloaked in sermons. The rain god Chaac, who had for centuries stood at the center of life, was soon confronted by saints and angels whose presence demanded recognition, and so began the slow dimming of Chaac's open worship. This fading did not happen all at once. Rituals, especially those tied to survival, are not easily abandoned. For a farmer who lived at the mercy of the rains, Chaac was not a mere idea. He was the rhythm of planting and harvest, the one who decided whether maize would thrive or wither. To forget him would have been unthinkable. And yet, under the pressure of conquest and conversion, his rituals were forced into silence. The Spanish missionaries, eager to replace Maya devotion with Catholic practice, often condemned the worship of Chaac as idolatry. They built churches on the very plazas where rain ceremonies had once been performed. They baptized children at the wells where offerings had once been lowered. They renamed sacred spaces with the titles of saints. What had been Chaac's realm was draped in new symbols, meant to overwrite memory, and yet memory does not so easily vanish. Archaeological and ethnographic traces reveal that many communities continued to honor Chaac in quieter ways, adapting their rituals to avoid confrontation. Prayers once sung to the rain god were sometimes whispered under the name of Saint Thomas or Saint John, figures whose feast days aligned with planting seasons. The cenotes still filled with water, still received offerings, though now cloaked in Christian language. In this subtle weaving of old and new, Chaac was never fully gone. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza itself became a symbol of this tension. Spanish chroniclers, upon hearing of the treasures and sacrifices once dedicated to Chaac there, condemned the practice as barbaric. Yet they could not erase the cenote's power. The water remained. The silence of the well remained. For the Maya, even as they adopted the outward practices of Catholicism, the cenote continued to whisper of older Devons. It is worth reflecting on what it means for a god to disappear. Is disappearance the same as death? Or is it more like retreater folding inward, a movement from the public square into the private heart? For many Maya, Chaac did not vanish. He shifted. He lived in the spaces where memory was strong enough to keep him alive, in lullabies sung to children, in a farmer's quiet word before the rains, in the humble offerings placed at the edges of fields. The disappearance then was less a loss than a transformation. The Spaniards could forbid public ritual, but they could not command the clouds. They could raise churches, but they could not stop the storms. Thunder still rolled across the sky, and with every flash of lightning, the old god's presence was felt. If not openly named, he was at least quietly acknowledged, hidden behind the veil of new faith. Some modern scholars describe this as syncretism, the blending of traditions. The Maya did not simply replace their gods with those of Spain. They wove them together. A rain prayer might now mention both Chaac and the Virgin Mary. A festival might combine Catholic saints with old agricultural rites. In this way, Chaac continued to dwell in the life of the people, though his name grew softer with each generation. One can imagine the resilience this required. To live under watchful eyes, yet still keep the thread of tradition alive. To bow before a crucifix, while silently remembering the rain god behind it. It was an act of quiet endurance, of faith transformed but not erased by the 17th century. Colonial reports mention fewer open rituals to Chaac, and yet, scattered references reveal that he lingered in certain communities, especially during times of drought. When the rains failed, when desperation grew, old prayers rose again, sometimes in secret, sometimes woven into Catholic rites. In need, the people remembered, and in remembering, Chaac's presence flickered back into the light. It is possible to see this fading, not only as a story of suppression, but also as a story of survival. Chaac's disappearance was never total. His spirit was carried forward in whispers, in symbols, in the shared understanding that rain remained sacred, no matter what name it was called under dot. And so, what does it mean to say that a god disappears? Perhaps no god ever truly does. They linger in the echoes of stone carvings, in the layers of language, in the rituals adapted to new names. They live in the questions we continue to ask. When the rains fall today in the Yucatan, do they not still sound like Chaac's laughter? When thunder rolls, does it not still carry his voice? The Spanish conquest may have dimmed Chaac's open worship, but it could not dim the human need to honor water, storm, and sky. The old rain god may have stepped back into shadow, yet shadows are not absence. They are the proof of something still standing in the light, and so Chaac endures, not always named, not always seen, but never forgotten. He lives in the rain itself, which no conquest, no sermon, no new god could ever take away. For how could one erase the sky? Under Spanish rule, daily life changed in ways both visible and invisible. Marketplaces began to revolve around European goods. Churches rose above old plazas, and the sound of bells replaced the conch shells that once called people to ceremony. But beneath these changes, the cycles of the land still asked the same questions. Corn still needed rain. Wells still needed to be filled. Families still watched to the horizon for clouds. And in these quiet moments, Chaac remained present. Though hidden from the eyes of priests and officials, the missionaries often wrote of their frustration. They described how Maya families would attend Mass with apparent devotion, only to slip away afterward to perform their superstitions. A simple act, Chaac as leaving food by a stone, or whispering a prayer at the edge of a field, was seen by the church as evidence of stubborn idolatry. For the Maya, however, these were not acts of rebellion. They were acts of survival. Without Chaac, the world felt incomplete. In some towns, Chaac's name began to dissolve into the prayers for Catholic saints. Saint Isidore, the patron of farmers, was often honored in ways that mirrored Chaac's old rites. Saint John the Baptist, whose feast day falls at the start of the rainy season, became another vessel through which petitions for water could flow. In this blending, the Spaniards heard only Catholic words, but the Maya heard something deeper, a continuity hidden beneath the surface. The cenotes, too, held their quiet resistance. These natural wells, long seen as gateways to the divine, could not be ignored or destroyed. Spanish friars might bless the waters, renaming them under Christian symbols, yet the people continued to treat them as sacred. Offerings shifted form, a candle instead of jade, a cross instead of copal, but the gesture remained. The water still received prayers, as it had for centuries. Occasionally, resistance took more open forms. Records from the 16th and 17th centuries describe moments when droughts struck hard, and entire communities returned to Chaac with open desperation. Colonial authorities noted these ceremonies with alarm, calling them evidence of relapse. But to the Maya, they were not relapses at all. They were lifelines, calls to the only power they trusted to answer the sky. It is striking to consider that while cathedrals rose in stone, the rains themselves remained outside all authority. No priest could summon a storm. No decree could banish thunder. In every storm, the Maya saw a truth that conquest could not erase. The lightning flashed across both church towers and old pyramids alike, indifferent to human dominion. And in those moments, Chaac's voice was undeniable. Over time, however, public memory softened. New generations grew up under Catholic rhythms, with catechisms replacing ancient chants. The names of saints became familiar, while Chaac's name was spoken less and less. Yet the echo of his presence persisted in gestures, in rituals of planting and harvest that bore his hidden imprint. The disappearance of Chaac, then, was not the closing of a door, but the dimming of a lantern, its glow faint, but never extinguished. Even today, traces of that lantern can still be found. In rural communities across the Yucatan, farmers sometimes gather to ask for rain in ceremonies that scholars recognize as direct descendants of Chaac's rites. Chickens may be offered, prayers recited, copal burned, yet the ceremony is often framed as Christian devotion. The boundary between faiths blurs, and within that blur, Chaac still breathes. This raises a gentle question. Can a god vanish if the world that gave him life still exists? As long as rain falls, as long as fields thirst for water, does not the essence of Chaac remain? The Spanish conquest altered the names, the symbols, the outward forms of worship, but the sky above remained untouched, and in every drop of rain, the memory of Chaac endures, for disappearance is never final. It is only another form of presence, quieter, hidden, waiting to be seen. Chapter 21. The rain god remembered. Even centuries after the conquest, Chaac has not disappeared. His presence lingers, not in the great temples or the public plazas where his name was once proclaimed, but in whispers, in stories, and in quiet customs carried forward from one generation to the next. For many Maya communities, memory was never just history, was continuity. To remember Chaac was not simply to recall an old god, but to keep a relationship alive with the forces that sustained life. Anthropologists working in Yucatan and Guatemala have noted that even into the modern era, ceremonies invoking rain are still performed. Some are spoken openly, others masked beneath Catholic prayers, but the essence remains the same, a plea to the sky for water. Farmers gather near fields, burn copal, offer food, and speak words that, while mingled with the names of saints, carry the rhythm of much older chants. What the Spanish friars once called idolatry persists quietly as devotion to the cycles of rain. Folklore also holds Chaac's shadow. In some villages, stories are still told of spirits that ride within the storm, striking the earth with lightning to release the waters trapped in the clouds. Sometimes they are described as Chaacs, plural and many, scattered across the heavens. At other times, they are remembered as helpers of the saints, messengers of divine will. In both cases, the image endures. Rain as a gift carried by beings beyond human control. Children growing up in Maya households often hear tales that mingle morality with weather. To mistreat the earth, to waste water, or to neglect offerings is said to anger the forces of the storm. To show respect, to pray, to live in balance with the land is to invite gentle rains. These lessons may no longer be framed in the grand theology of ancient temples, but they carry the same spiritual logic. Human life and natural life are bound together, with rain as the bridge. Some of the most vivid survivals of Chaac's presence are the Chaac ceremonies, still performed in parts of Yucatan. These rituals, meant to call for rain, involve offerings of food, the blessing of seeds, and the invocation of Chaac's name alongside Christian prayers. They are not museum pieces, but living traditions, carried out when drought threatens crops or when communities feel the need for balance with the sky. In these moments, Chaac is not a forgotten god of the past. He is a partner, called upon as urgently today as he was 1,000 years ago. The persistence of these rites reveals something profound about memory. Even under centuries of suppression, even after temples were abandoned and idols broken, the rain itself became the scripture. Every storm recalled Chaac. Every dry season reminded communities why he mattered. No official decree could erase the experience of waiting for clouds to gather, or the relief of hearing thunder in the distance. In that simple, universal need, the memory of Chaac found refuge. And so Chaac lives on, not as a distant relic, but as a rhythm within daily life. Farmers planting maize still glance at the sky with hope, much as their ancestors did. Families still speak to the earth and water with care. And in festivals, in songs, in the soft prayers of the elderly, Chaac is remembered, not always by name, but by presence. Perhaps this is what it means for a god to endure, not through monuments or formal rituals alone, but through the ways people continue to live, to hope, and to interpret the world around them. Chaac may no longer preside over grand ceremonies in stone courts, but he remains in the murmur of rain upon thatched roofs, in the scent of damp soil after a storm, and in the stories that remind children of the power that dwells in the clouds. In this sense, memory is not static. It is alive, adapting to new times while carrying forward an ancient thread. And the thread of Chaac woven into water, crops, and sky remains, visible even if faint, even if quiet. The rain still falls, and in every drop, the rain god is remembered. Chapter 22, Reflection. Rain as eternal presence. Rain has no beginning and no end. It rises as mist, gathers in clouds, and falls again upon the earth. It seeps into rivers, rests in lakes, and returns once more to the sky. For the Maya, Chaac was never only a deity confined to a temple carving or a ritual chant. He was the cycle itself, the endless movement of water, the rhythm by which life endured. To reflect on Chaac is to reflect on rain, not simply as weather, not only as a seasonal necessity, but as an eternal presence that has shaped human existence from the very first harvests to the fields that still grow today. Rain is both ordinary and miraculous. It is as familiar as the sound of drops on a roof, yet as mysterious as lightning's sudden flash across the horizon. It is in that paradox, both intimate and unknowable, that Chaac remains alive for thousands of years. Communities across Mesoamerica built their lives around this presence. They aligned calendars, carved stone serpents, offered food and incense, and whispered prayers into the humid air. These were not acts of superstition alone. They were ways of acknowledging a truth still visible to us now, that without rain, no seed takes root, no crop ripens, no life continues. To forget rain was to forget existence itself. And yet, rain is more than survival. It is renewal. The Maya understood that just as the earth could crack in drought, it could be healed by the first storms of the season. The scent of wet soil, the darkening of leaves, the coolness spreading through the air, all were signs of restoration. The people saw in this renewal not only the promise of food, but the pattern of life and death. Dryness, struggle, and waiting were not the end. They were stages in a larger rhythm, where rain returned, and with it, hope in many ways. The figure of Chaac was a bridge between the human and the natural. He gave the rain a face, a voice, a place in the sacred order. To call upon Chaac was to give language to the yearning for water, to transform uncertainty into ritual, and to bind the community together in shared dependence. But beyond the name, beyond the carved mask and the thunderbolt axe, what endured most deeply was rain itself. Chaac and rain became inseparable, two ways of speaking of the same eternal reality. Even after the conquest, even after new gods were taught and old temples fell quiet, the rains still came. They did not bow to conquest. They did not cease when idols were toppled. And so, in every storm that swept across the Yucatan, in every drizzle that settled over the maize fields, Chaac could still be remembered, whether his name was spoken aloud or not. Rain carried the memory forward, silently, faithfully. There is something profoundly human in this persistence. We often search for permanence in stone or scripture, in monuments or laws. Yet water teaches a different lesson. Its permanence is found in movement, in flow, in return. A drop may vanish into soil, but it rises again in mist. A storm may pass, but another gathers. Chaac too lives in this rhythm, not as a fixed image frozen in the past, but as a presence that returns whenever the sky darkens and the first drops fall. To consider rain as eternal is also to recognize its humility. It does not demand attention, though it commands survival. It falls on palaces and huts alike. It feeds weeds as well as crops. It is impartial, and in that impartiality, it teaches a quiet form of reverence. The Maya, like so many cultures, responded to this impartial gift with gratitude, ritual, and awe. And perhaps here lies a lesson that still speaks to us today, to see in each drop of rain not only water, but continuity, the same presence that nourished ancient fields, the same that will nourish future generations. There are moments when the rain seems almost personal, the hush it casts over a village, the rhythm it beats upon the roof at night, the way it soaks into dry earth as though answering a prayer. These are moments that remind us why Chaac was never only myth. He was an interpretation of something real, something experienced daily, something essential. The rain itself is the testimony. But what then does it mean for us to remember Chaac now? In an age of science and forecasts, of reservoirs and irrigation systems, the rain can seem less mysterious. We may no longer gather as villagers to call for it with chants and offerings. Yet even today, no technology truly commands the clouds. Droughts still humble nations. Floods still overwhelm. And in each reminder, the truth emerges. Rain remains beyond human control. It arrives not by decree, but by rhythm, ancient and eternal. Perhaps Chaac, in this sense, is not a god lost to history, but a symbol still alive within the natural order. He reminds us that reverence does not end with temples. It continues in the ways we treat water, the ways we respect the earth, the ways we recognize our dependence on cycles greater than ourselves. Chaac lives in every act of gratitude for rain, in every recognition that water is sacred. As the Maya once looked to the horizon for storm clouds, so too do we. And as they once found in rain both fear and blessing, so too do we still. The difference may be in language, but the essence has not changed. To live is to depend on water, to wait for its return, and to trust that it will come again. And so, Chaac does not vanish with the past. He becomes the rain itself, eternal, nourishing, always falling softly. When the storm gathers, when thunder rolls, when the air cools, and the first drops touch the earth, he is, not in distant myth, not in forgotten ritual, but in the eternal presence of rain. And perhaps the question lingers still: if every drop is both ancient and new, if every storm is both memory and renewal, then is rain not only weather, but a sacred presence that has never left us.